She never stopped trying to reach him. He never knew. And 7 months of silence nearly destroyed everything they were too afraid to say out loud. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. If it hits you somewhere real, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. This one's worth it. The drive up to Cedar Ridge had taken Nathan Carter almost 4 hours, and by the time his truck crested the last switchback and the cluster of pine log cabins came into view through the gray afternoon light, his back hurt, his coffee was cold, and his 7-year-old daughter Lily had asked him 16 times, he'd counted, whether there would be hot chocolate at Aunt Claire's wedding retreat. Yes, he said again, pulling into the gravel lot beside a rusted green mailbox. There will be hot chocolate. With the little marshmallows. With whatever marshmallows they have, Bug. Lily unbuckled herself before the truck fully stopped, which she knew she wasn't supposed to do, and Nathan let it go because, honestly, he didn't have the energy for that particular argument right now. He killed the engine and just sat for a moment, both hands still on the wheel, listening to the wind push through the pines outside. Somewhere up the hill, smoke was rising from the main cabin's chimney. He could smell it faintly even through the closed windows, cedar and wood smoke, the specific smell of his sister's idea of a perfect December weekend. Claire had planned this retreat down to the last detail, 4 days in the mountains before the actual wedding on Sunday. Family only, she'd said. Intimate. A chance for everyone to breathe before the chaos of the ceremony. Nathan had agreed mostly because he couldn't say no to Claire, and partly because Lily deserved a Christmas memory that didn't involve him working late at his drafting table while she watched cartoons in the next room. He wasn't expecting it to be easy. Family gatherings never were, especially with his mother in attendance and Claire's future in-laws flying in from out of state. He'd packed patience along with his boots and his good flannel shirt and told himself, 4 days, be present, smile when required, don't let anyone corner you about your personal life. He had not packed for this. The cabin porch was wide and built from rough-hewn timber, with a string of warm Edison bulbs that weren't on yet because it was only 3 in the afternoon. Snow had started coming down in the last hour of his drive. Not heavy yet, just a suggestion of what was coming. And it had settled in a thin white layer over the porch railing and the 2 Adirondack chairs flanking the front door. One of those chairs was occupied. Nathan saw her before she saw him. He had approximately 3 seconds of advantage, 3 seconds where he could take in the whole picture without having to react to it, and he used those 3 seconds poorly. He froze. Literally stopped walking. Lily ran ahead of him up the porch steps, delighted by the snow, oblivious, and Nathan stood in the gravel lot with his duffel bag hanging from one hand and his car keys biting into the palm of the other, and stared at Sophia Bennett, sitting in his sister's Adirondack chair like she'd always been there. She was wearing a dark green coat he didn't recognize. Her hair was longer than he remembered, pulled over one shoulder. She had a ceramic mug cradled in both hands, and she was looking out at the tree line, not at him. And for one completely irrational moment, Nathan thought maybe, he could just get back in the truck and pretend he'd forgotten something. Then Lily hit the top porch step, and the old wood creaked loudly enough to startle a bird from the nearest pine, and Sophia turned her head. Their eyes met. The mug in her hands didn't move. Her expression shifted through about 4 different things in rapid succession. Surprise, something that looked almost like relief, then a careful, practiced neutrality that Nathan recognized immediately because he'd watched her constructed in business meetings and difficult conversations for years. She was very good at it. She'd always been very good at it. He wasn't. Whatever crossed his face in those first 2 seconds was entirely out of his control, and he knew it, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it except walk forward. So he walked forward. Deepening. Nathan. Her voice was even. Professional almost, which was somehow worse. Sophia. He stopped at the base of the porch steps. 3 wooden steps between them. I didn't know you'd be here. Claire invited me. A pause. I assumed you knew. She didn't mention it. A beat of silence. Lily had already disappeared through the front door, presumably in search of the promised marshmallows, leaving Nathan alone on the bottom step with his duffel bag and 7 months of unsaid things pressing against the back of his teeth. Small world, he said finally, because apparently that was what he had. Sophia looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, the way she used to when she was trying to figure out whether he was being honest or just managing the situation. And then she nodded, once, and looked back at the tree line. Small world, she agreed. He went inside. The main cabin was warm and loud in the way only family gatherings could produce. Overlapping conversations, the smell of something cooking, his mother's voice carrying from the kitchen at a volume she'd never once acknowledged was too high. Claire appeared from around a corner and threw her arms around him the moment he cleared the doorway, and he hugged her back hard because she was his sister, and she was getting married in 4 days, and none of this was her fault, probably. "You didn't tell me Sophia was coming," he said, his chin still on top of her head. Claire pulled back. She had the specific expression of someone who had made a calculated decision and wasn't particularly sorry about it. "I thought it would be fine." "Claire, she's one of my closest friends, Nathan. She's been one of my closest friends since college. I wasn't going to not invite her to my wedding weekend because you two had a—" She searched for the word, "a thing." It wasn't a thing. You stopped speaking to her. "I didn't stop." He stopped, exhaled through his nose. We both stopped speaking. "Right." Claire reached up and patted his arm in the way that meant she was done discussing it. "Your room is the third door on the left. Dinner's at 7. Lily's already in the kitchen interrogating Marcus about hot chocolate options." She was gone before he could say anything else. His room was small and pine-paneled, with a window that looked out over the back slope of the mountain. The snow was coming down a little heavier now. Nathan sat on the edge of the narrow bed and looked at his hands for a while. He'd thought about this. Of course he had. You don't end a 6-year friendship in a 2-minute conversation outside a parking garage and then not think about it, regardless of how angry you were or how justified you told yourself you were. He'd thought about it during long evenings when Lily was asleep and the apartment was too quiet. He'd thought about it every time something happened, good or bad or just interesting. And his first instinct was still to reach for his phone and call her. He'd never called. He'd assumed she hadn't either. The fact that she was 30 feet away in an Adirondack chair had not been part of any version of this weekend he'd imagined. He unpacked his bag slowly, methodically, the way he did when he needed something to do with his hands. Flannel shirts on the wooden hangers, toiletries on the narrow shelf above the small sink. Lily's extra sweater folded on the chair in the corner, because she always got cold and always refused to admit it. Normal things. Regular things. Things that had nothing to do with the specific way Sophia's face had moved through those 4 expressions in 3 seconds when she'd seen him. He hung up his good shirt for Sunday and told himself he was fine. He was not particularly convincing. Dinner was a controlled chaos that Nathan navigated mostly by keeping his eyes on his plate and his attention on Lily, who was seated between him and his mother and had already charmed every single one of Claire's future in-laws within the first 10 minutes. His daughter had a gift for that, for walking into a room full of strangers and making them feel like they'd known her forever. He had no idea where she got it, certainly not from him. Sophia sat at the far end of the long farmhouse table, between Claire and a woman named Patricia, who was the mother of Claire's fiancé, Marcus. Nathan was aware of her the way you're aware of a sound you can't quite identify. Not loudly, not intrusively, but constantly. A background frequency he couldn't tune out. She laughed once at something Patricia said, and the laugh was exactly the same. That was the thing that got him, sitting there with his fork in his hand and his sister's future mother-in-law talking at him about property values in Charlotte. The laugh was exactly the same as it had always been, slightly louder than she intended, always a beat after the punchline, like she was still deciding whether something was funny while her mouth had already decided it was. He'd missed that laugh. He was irritated that he'd missed it. "Nathan," his mother touched his arm. "Patricia asked you something." He turned back to the table. "Sorry, long drive. What was the question?" After dinner, the group migrated to the large living room with its massive stone fireplace, and Nathan helped Marcus and Marcus's younger brother stack extra wood from the covered pile outside because it gave him something concrete to do. The snow was serious now, coming down steadily, coating the porch in 2 or 3 inches, and still going. "That's a lot of snow," Marcus's brother observed. His name was Derek, and he was 26 and had the easy confidence of someone who'd never had to second-guess himself about anything particularly important. "Mountain weather," Nathan said. "It'll probably be worse by morning. Claire said the roads might close. Claire says a lot of things." Derek laughed and they carried the last armload inside. The fireplace was going by the time Nathan came back in, and Lily had arranged herself on the large braided rug in front of it with her cup of hot chocolate, marshmallows obtained, apparently, and was explaining to Patricia's husband the rules of a card game she'd invented herself. The rules, as Nathan understood them, changed depending on who was winning. He'd never figured out how to beat her at it. He was looking at his daughter and smiling, genuinely, for the first time since he'd pulled into the gravel lot, when someone came to stand beside him. He knew without looking. "She's great," Sophia said quietly. "She's gotten so big." Nathan kept his eyes on Lily. 7 months. "I know." A pause. "She has your stubborn chin." "She has her own chin." Another pause, this one longer. "I'm not here to make your weekend difficult," Sophia said. "I want you to know that. I thought about not coming at all, actually. But Claire, she's my friend. And I didn't want to let what happened between us take something from her." Nathan turned to look at her then. She was watching Lily, not him, her arms crossed lightly over her chest. She looked tired around the eyes, in a way that expensive concealer was almost covering. "Okay," he said. She glanced at him. "Okay? I'm not here to make your weekend difficult either." He looked back at the fireplace. "We're adults. It's 4 days." 4 days, she agreed. They stood there for another moment. Not comfortably, but not as badly as it could have been. And then Nathan's mother called him from the kitchen about something, and the moment dissolved, and he went. He put Lily to bed at 9:30 in the small room she was sharing with Claire's niece, a quiet 6-year-old named Bee who had been asleep since 8. Lily made him sit on the edge of the bed for a while and tell her about what it had been like when he was a kid visiting mountains, which was a story she'd heard enough times to correct him when he got details wrong. "You said it was a blue cabin," she told him seriously. "Last time you said it was green." "It might have been teal." "What's teal?" "Sort of blue-green." She considered this. "That's cheating." He kissed her forehead and told her she was the most inconvenient person he'd ever met, which was something he'd started saying to her when she was 4, and which she found, for reasons he'd never entirely understood, deeply comforting. "I know," she said, already drowsy. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Bug." He turned off her lamp and stood in the hallway for a minute, just existing. The house had settled into its quieter second gear. Lower voices, the clink of someone washing dishes, the particular creak of old floorboards. Outside, the wind had picked up. He almost went to bed. He should have gone to bed. Instead, he went to the small sitting area at the end of the hall where someone had left a lamp on, and he sat in the wingback chair there and stared out the window at the snow. And he let himself, for a few private minutes, be honest with himself about the day. Seeing her had hit him harder than he wanted it to. That was the simple, undramatic truth. He'd told himself for months that what he felt when he thought about Sophia Bennett was mostly anger, the clean, manageable anger of someone who'd been treated carelessly by someone they trusted. And the anger was real. He wasn't inventing it. But it had never been only that, and sitting in a wingback chair in his sister's mountain cabin with the snow coming down outside, he was tired enough to stop pretending otherwise. He'd missed her. He'd missed her steadily and specifically for 7 months. The way you miss something that was woven into your daily life so thoroughly you didn't notice the weave until it was gone. That didn't change what happened. But it was true anyway. The problem with the rooms became apparent the next morning, and it arrived in the form of Claire appearing in the kitchen doorway while Nathan was on his second cup of coffee looking sheepish in a way that meant she'd known about it before she came to tell him. "So," she said. Nathan set down his mug. "What?" "The Hendersons, that's Patricia's sister and her husband, I know I should have checked the RSVPs more carefully. They apparently told Marcus they couldn't make it, so we only set up 5 rooms, And then they decided they could make it after all, and they got in at 11 last night after everyone was asleep. Claire. And Marcus put them in the room we were going to use for Claire. She stopped, looked at him. There's only one room left with a second bed. Silence. It's the room Sophia's in, Claire said. It has the 2 twin beds. We could move one of those beds to the Henderson situation, but Marcus already... Okay, the point is, structurally, the simplest solution. No. Nathan, it's literally just sleeping in the same room. Then you sleep in there with her and give me your room. Marcus and I are in the main suite. We can't... Derek. Derek is in the loft, and you know how you get about heights. I don't get... He stopped himself. This was not a conversation he was going to win because Claire had clearly wargamed it before she came to him. Did you do this on purpose? She looked him dead in the eye. I would never do that. She was lying, or maybe she wasn't. With Claire, it was sometimes impossible to tell because she believed so thoroughly in her own good intentions that manipulation and sincerity became basically indistinguishable. 4 days, he said. 3.5, technically, because today's already... Claire. Breakfast is in 20 minutes, she said briskly, and left. He told Sophia himself. He found her on the back porch with her coffee, looking out at the mountain, which was blinding white in the morning light. The snow had stopped sometimes in the night, but left behind a foot of it, clean and untracked, and the sky now was that particular December blue that happened after a storm. She looked at him when he slid the door open. She clocked something in his expression immediately. She'd always been good at that, and he watched her brace slightly. Claire's having a room situation, he said. She needs to put me in your room, the one with the 2 twins. I told her it wasn't ideal, but... Okay, Sophia said. He waited. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say? I don't know. I expected... He didn't know what he'd expected. Resistance, maybe. Something he could push back against. Fine. Okay. I'll move my stuff in after breakfast. I already moved mine to the left side, she said. I was there first. The left side is... He started and then stopped, because he'd been about to say the left side is the side I always take, and he was not going to say that. Fine. The light's better on the right side anyway, she said, turning back to the mountains. Your stuff will be more protected from the window draft. He didn't say anything to that. Thank you, he said instead, and went back inside. The morning passed in the way that group retreat mornings pass, slowly, in layers, with people surfacing from their rooms at different times, and the kitchen becoming a rotating cast of half-awake relatives and in-laws, all of them moving around each other with the specific, careful politeness of people who didn't yet know each other well enough to be rude. Nathan was good in these situations. It was one of the things people didn't always expect from him because he was quiet in a way that read as antisocial until you spent time with him. He wasn't antisocial. He was just selective, which was different. He helped with breakfast dishes without being asked and talked football with Derek and Marcus's father without caring about football even slightly. And he spent 45 minutes helping Patricia's sister untangle a set of decorative lights that Claire wanted strung across the back porch, which was the kind of task he actually liked. A clear problem with a satisfying solution. Sophia spent the morning at the kitchen table with a laptop, working, or trying to work. He saw her there when he passed through for refills, the same slight furrow between her brows that meant she was concentrating, or trying to concentrate, while the social noise of the cabin swirled around her. He knew that furrow very well. He refilled his coffee and didn't stop walking. The afternoon brought snowshoeing expedition for those who wanted it, which turned out to be Marcus, Derek, 3 of the in-laws, Lily, and Bea, who discovered a shared enthusiasm for going very fast down small slopes and ignoring adult warnings about it. Nathan was about to join when his phone showed a work email that couldn't wait, a structural issue on the project he'd left with his associate, something about a load-bearing calculation that needed his eyes on it specifically. He found a corner of the living room with decent light and spread his drawings across the coffee table and spent 2 hours going cross-eyed over calculations. He didn't notice when Sophia settled into the chair across from him. He noticed when she said, "Your cantilever spacing is off on the 3rd panel." He looked up. She was looking at his drawings upside down, her laptop closed in her lap. She nodded toward the spread of papers. I don't know what the project is, but that third set of measurements from where I'm sitting, they look off. Nathan looked at the drawings. Then he rotated them toward her and looked at them from her angle. She was right. Not catastrophically, not in a way that his associate should have missed, but off by enough to matter. Yeah, he said. You're right. She looked faintly surprised, like she hadn't expected him to agree that quickly. Okay. You're still annoyingly good at reading things upside down. Something moved through her expression. Not quite a smile, but in that vicinity. I had a lot of practice at your drafting table. He almost said something. He was half a second from saying something real, something that acknowledged what that meant. All those hours she'd spent sitting across from him while he worked and they talked about everything and nothing. But then his phone buzzed with a follow-up from his associate and the moment sealed back over, and he picked up his pencil and started correcting the panel spacing. He heard her open her laptop again. They worked in silence for an hour and a half, in the same room, and it was the most comfortable Nathan had felt since he arrived. He didn't know what to do with that, so he filed it somewhere in the back of his mind and kept working. The afternoon crowd came back windburned and energized, and Lily immediately began describing the entire snowshoeing expedition at rapid volume to anyone who would hold still long enough to listen. Nathan caught her before the telling reached the part where she apparently went down a slope she'd been explicitly told not to go down, and rerouted her toward hot chocolate and a change of clothes. Did you know, Lily told him, pulling her damp socks off one at a time, that B has the same middle name as me? What's B's middle name? Rose, just like mine. That's a coincidence. We think it's a sign, Lily said, in the voice of someone stating an obvious fact to someone disappointingly literal-minded. A sign of what? That we're supposed to be best friends. She looked at him with the calm certainty of a 7-year-old who has never once in her life been unsure of something that mattered. You just know. You know? Nathan handed her dry socks. Yeah, he said. I know. He went back out to the hallway and leaned against the wall for a moment with his eyes closed. You just know. Evening came quickly at altitude, the sky going orange and then deep purple and then fully dark before 5 o'clock. The cabin lights came on warm, and the fireplace in the living room had been stoked back up, and Claire had somehow arranged for a local woman to come and teach a Christmas wreath-making session, which meant the dining table was now covered in pine boughs and ribbon and wire frames, and everyone was attempting to be crafty with varying degrees of success. Nathan's wreath looked like it had sustained some structural damage. He was not a wreath person. Lily's looked like something that could be sold, which was frankly embarrassing. You have to shape it, Lily instructed him, the way she'd been instructed 15 minutes ago by the woman running the session. You can't just pile it. I'm shaping it. Dad, you're piling it. From across the table, someone laughed, a short, quickly suppressed sound. Nathan didn't look up, but he felt the corner of his own mouth twitch against his will. It has character, he said. It has problems, Lily said. The laugh came again, a little less suppressed this time. Nathan finally glanced over. Sophia was looking down at her own wreath, which was, he noted with some annoyance, quite good, but her shoulders were shaking slightly. You can laugh, he said. She looked up. The smile was fully there now, the real one, the one that took over her whole face slightly to the left of center. I wasn't going to say anything. You were absolutely going to say something. I was thinking it very loudly, she conceded. Lily looked between them with bright, interested eyes. Do you two know each other? A pause. Not a long one, but present. We used to be friends, Nathan said. Lily looked at Sophia. What happened? Lily. What? It's a reasonable question. Sophia tilted her head at Nathan in a way that said, she's not wrong, which was infuriating because she wasn't. He turned back to his structurally compromised wreath and began attempting to shape it. Grown-up stuff, he said. Pass me the wire cutters. Lily passed the wire cutters with the air of someone who had registered this conversation for future reference and would be returning to it. The house went quiet around 11. The snowshoeing crowd had worn itself out, and the in-laws were adjusted to the time zone difference, and Claire and Marcus had disappeared to their suite with the specific energy of two people who were 4 days from their wedding and still had 17 things to confirm with the venue coordinator. Nathan was not sleepy. This was a recurring problem in his life, his body needing sleep while his brain was apparently interested in filing paperwork. He went to the room he was now sharing with Sophia because there was nowhere else particularly to go. She was there already, sitting cross-legged on her bed with the small bedside lamp on, not looking at a screen for once, just reading an actual book. He'd forgotten she did that. He'd forgotten a lot of specific things about her until this weekend started giving them back to him one at a time. She looked up when he came in. "Hey." "Hey." He sat on the edge of his bed and pulled off his boots. The room was small enough that there was maybe 6 feet between their two beds. "Sorry, I'm not tired yet." "You don't have to apologize for being in the room," she said, and went back to her book. He sat there for a moment, got up and looked out the window at the dark mountain, sat back down. "I'm going to be honest," he said. She looked up again, waited. "This is," he gestured vaguely, "strange. This whole day. I don't know how to be in this room with you." Sophia was quiet for a moment. She closed her book, keeping her thumb in it. "I know. He stopped, started again. "I keep almost saying things, normal things, things I would have said before." He shook his head. "It's like muscle memory." 6 years, she said. 6 years, he agreed. Another quiet. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. The lamp between them cast a small, warm circle of light that left the corners of the room in shadow. "Nathan." Her voice had changed. The professional evenness was gone from it. I know this isn't the moment, but I want you to know that I am aware that I handled something very badly. I know that. I don't need you to respond to that right now. I just needed you to know I know it." He looked at her. She was looking back, steady, and he could see how much it had cost her to say even that much. Sophia Bennett, who had built a company from 17 employees to 240, who could walk into a room full of investors and take command of it in 4 minutes, who had never once in the time he'd known her asked anyone for anything she thought she could provide herself. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she echoed. He turned off the overhead light, leaving just her bedside lamp, and lay back on his bed staring at the ceiling. "Your wreath was fine," Sophia said, after a long enough pause that he'd half-expected silence for the rest of the night. "It was not fine. It was rustic. It was a disaster. Lily gets her brutal honesty from somewhere," she said, and he could hear the smile in it. He stared at the ceiling. "She really does." The lamp went off a few minutes later. The room was dark, and the mountain was dark, and the wind outside was the only sound. He lay there for a long time before he slept. But he slept. And that was the thing neither of them said aloud. That for the first time in 7 months, with 6 feet and a world of unfinished business between them, they both slept through the night. The second morning at Cedar Ridge arrived the way mountain mornings do in December. Without ceremony, without warmth, with a white light coming through the curtains that had no softness in it whatsoever. Nathan was awake before it fully arrived, lying on his back in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling the same way he'd fallen asleep staring at it. Except now there was enough gray light to see the knots in the pine wood above him. Sophia was still asleep. He could tell by her breathing, slow and even, with the occasional small shift of the mattress springs that meant she hadn't moved much. She'd always slept like that. Still, like someone who'd made a decision to be unconscious and was committed to it. He didn't know why he remembered that. He hadn't been in a position to observe it for any reason that wasn't entirely innocent. They'd fallen asleep on each other's couches during late-night movies more times than he could count over 6 years. That was all it was. That was all it had ever been, which was what he told himself every time the more complicated version of the truth tried to surface. He got up carefully, found his jeans on the chair in the corner, and slipped out before she woke up. The kitchen was cold and dark, and he was apparently the first person alive in the entire cabin, which suited him fine. He found the coffee and the filters and the machine that required 3 attempts to figure out, and he stood at the kitchen window while it brewed and looked at the mountain. The snow from 2 nights ago was still there, undisturbed in the back field, tracked and compressed in the paths between the buildings. The sky was low and gray in a way that said more was coming. He poured his coffee and went to sit on the back porch, which was cold enough to make him immediately question the decision, but which he didn't reverse because he needed the air. He needed something to push against besides his own thoughts. The problem with Cedar Ridge, he was realizing, was that it didn't give you anywhere to go. In regular life, you could manage things by staying in motion. Work, Lily's school pickups, grocery runs, the project on his drafting table, the structural calculations that required his full attention. Motion was how Nathan Carter managed himself. He'd built an entire adult life around it. You didn't have to sit with difficult things if you kept moving through them. This mountain retreat was specifically designed to take motion away from you. That was its whole point. Breathe. Be still. Reconnect. He hated it a little. His coffee was getting cold and he drank it anyway and told himself that he was fine, that seeing Sophia last night hadn't undone him, that sleeping 6 feet away from her in the same room hadn't brought back every specific thing he'd spent months trying to file into the category of things that don't apply to my life anymore. He told himself all of it with reasonable conviction, sitting on the porch in his flannel shirt in December, and he was maybe 60% successful. The door behind him slid open. He didn't turn around. "Coffee's in the kitchen," he said. "I know." Sophia came out and stood at the railing, hands wrapped around her own mug, looking out at the same view. She was wearing a gray sweater he recognized. She'd had it for years, soft from washing, the kind of thing you keep not because it's nice anymore, but because it's broken and exactly right. "I was wondering where you went." "Just needed air." She nodded, didn't push it. They stood there in silence for a while, not the uncomfortable kind from the first afternoon, not the careful professional neutrality of the porch chairs, but something slightly different. The silence of two people who had once been comfortable enough with each other to not fill every quiet moment with noise. It was almost worse. The comfortable version was almost harder to be in. "Lily talks in her sleep," Sophia said. "I heard her from the hallway last night, just so you know." Nathan smiled without meaning to. "She's been doing that since she was 3. Full conversations, completely coherent, completely asleep." "What does she talk about?" "I've heard her negotiate the terms of a play date. I've heard her explain to someone at length why butterflies shouldn't be called butterflies. Last week she gave a speech about pasta." Sophia laughed. That same real laugh, the one that came a beat late. The cold air made it visible for a second, a small puff of it, and then gone. "She's something else," Sophia said. "Yeah." Nathan looked at his mug. "She is." Another quiet. Less comfortable this time because they'd edged toward the territory where the real things lived. Lily, who Sophia had watched grow from 2 years old to 7, who had once called Sophia on Nathan's phone by accident at 7 in the morning and kept her on the line for 20 minutes talking about a dream she'd had about a talking fish. The specific texture of a friendship that had been woven into all the parts of his life, not just the parts that were easy to section off. "I should get her up soon," Nathan said. "She sleeps late if you let her, and then she's impossible by 9. "Okay," Sophia said. He went inside. She stayed on the porch. He told himself he didn't notice. The day had a scheduled itinerary, such that Claire had printed actual itineraries, which was very Claire, that involved a group breakfast, a late morning of wedding prep activities, an afternoon free hour, and then a formal rehearsal dinner adjacent gathering in the evening, even though the actual rehearsal dinner was happening Saturday at the venue in town. This was, as best Nathan could understand it, a rehearsal for the rehearsal dinner, which was exactly the kind of redundancy Claire found comforting. Lily ate breakfast with the energy of someone who had slept 10 hours and had extensive plans for the day. She wanted to build something in the snow. She wanted to find out if there were any animals she could observe. She wanted to know if the frozen-over creek at the bottom of the slope was actually frozen all the way through, and Nathan said no to that one specifically and firmly, and she accepted it in the way she accepted things she intended to revisit later. He was watching her eat her third piece of toast when Marcus's brother Derek dropped into the seat across from him with a plate of eggs and the easy energy of someone who'd also slept well and was aggressively okay with everything. "Big storm coming tonight," Derek said, pulling out his phone to show Nathan the weather app. "Like, significant. Could be another 1.5 feet." Nathan looked at the radar image. A mass of white and green was sitting over the mountain range with the look of something that had committed to its plans. "How's the road situation?" "Already called down this morning. The county road up to the ridge is going to be inaccessible by tonight, probably. Route 7 into town might be okay, depending." Derek shrugged with the casualness of someone who did not have a 7-year-old with him. "We might be snowed in for a day." "Claire knows about this?" "Claire has known about this since yesterday and has chosen to frame it as a cozy bonding opportunity." Derek said it with affection and a specific tired amusement that suggested he'd spent a lot of time around people who reframed problems as opportunities. "Her words." Nathan looked at the radar again. A day snowed in. A day snowed in at Cedar Ridge, with his mother and his sister's in-laws and Sophia 6 feet across the room. "Great," he said. "Could be fun," Derek said cheerfully, and started eating his eggs. Lily, who had been listening from 2 seats down with the attentiveness she applied to anything that might affect her plans, turned to Nathan with bright eyes. "Does more snow mean we can build something bigger?" Nathan looked at her. "Eat your toast." "That's a yes," she told Bea across the table, and they exchanged a look of pure conspiratorial joy. The morning dissolved into wedding prep activities, which in practice meant Claire directing various people in various tasks with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Nathan found himself recruited to move furniture in the main living room. Apparently the arrangement needed to accommodate a small cocktail hour setup for Saturday, which took 2 hours and involved a lot of discussion about angles and traffic flow that he participated in competently while thinking about something else entirely. The something else was, specifically, what Derek had said at breakfast. Not about the storm itself, but about what the storm meant logistically. He thought the 4 days had a natural structure to them. The weekend would unfold, there would be a wedding, people would disperse back to their regular lives. Clean, boundaried. He could manage 4 days of awkward proximity if there was a clear endpoint. A day snowed in complicated the math. Sophia spent the morning at the kitchen table again, working through whatever required her attention, and Nathan noticed, in the peripheral, involuntary way he'd been noticing things about her since he arrived, that she looked tense in a way that went beyond focused. She closed her laptop at one point and sat with her hands flat on the table for a moment, looking at nothing, and then opened it again. He knew that posture. He'd seen it before, during the years when her company was going through a hard expansion period, when she was making decisions that affected a lot of people and carrying the weight of that largely by herself, because that was how Sophia operated. She didn't distribute the weight. She redistributed her own capacity to carry it, and never quite admitted when the capacity was running low. He didn't say anything. It wasn't his place anymore to notice that. That was the specific loss he hadn't let himself fully account for. Not just the companionship, or the daily calls, or the fact that she was the person he'd have called when Lily's school called him about a problem last month that turned out to be nothing but had scared him for 45 minutes. It was the particular knowledge of another person, the familiarity, the way you accumulate understanding of someone over years until you can read the set of their shoulders from across a room. He'd lost that when he walked away. Or he'd walked away thinking she'd left first, which maybe wasn't exactly the same thing. He moved the last chair to where Claire wanted it and went to find his daughter. Lily and Bea had built something in the back field that defied easy categorization. It was tall. It incorporated what looked like a significant portion of the snow from the path between the cabins. There were arms of a kind, and a large flat section Nathan couldn't identify the purpose of. "It's a snow person," Lily said, "but she has a table." "Why does she have a table?" "So she has somewhere to put things." "What things?" "Her things." Lily gestured broadly. "Everyone needs somewhere to put their things." Nathan looked at it for a moment. "That's actually a valid point." Lily looked pleased. "I know." Bea added a pine cone to the flat surface Nathan was now understanding to be a snow table, and they both stepped back to assess it with the seriousness of artists reviewing a finished canvas. Nathan stood beside them in the snow and looked at it too, and the 3 of them were standing like that when the back door opened and Sophia came out in her coat. She stopped when she saw the construction, looked at it, looked at Lily. "Is that a table?" she said. "Obviously," Lily said. Obviously, Sophia agreed. She walked over and stood beside Nathan to look at it. Her shoulder was maybe 4 inches from his. It's good work. We're not done, Bee said seriously. She needs a chair. She can't sit in a snow chair, Lily said. She'll get wet. She's made of snow. Then she needs a snow waterproof chair. This debate apparently required relocating, and both girls moved off to the right side of the construction to discuss it in lower voices, leaving Nathan and Sophia standing in front of the snow table woman in a silence that this time had a different quality to it. Not comfortable exactly, but easier than it had been yesterday. Like a door that had been stuck had opened a few inches. You were tense this morning, Nathan said. Not an accusation, just a statement. Sophia looked at him. Something moved through her expression. The instinct to deflect, which he watched her consciously set aside. We're in the middle of a restructuring at Valence. 2 of my directors disagree with the approach and they're not quiet about it. I'm managing it from a mountain in December. Can it wait until Monday? Some of it. She picked up a piece of snow from the railing, compressed it, turned it in her hands. Not to throw, just to do something. Some of it can't. You always did this, he said. Brought it with you, everywhere. So did you. That's fair. She let the compressed snow drop. It's different when the decisions affect 240 people's jobs. I can't just... She stopped herself. I know how it looks. I know it looked like that to you, even before. That work was always the priority. I didn't say that. You thought it. Once or twice, he admitted. But I also knew why. It wasn't... I never thought it was mindless ambition. I knew why it mattered to you. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully parse, like she was deciding whether to trust what she'd just heard. Yeah? Yeah. He looked back at Lily and Bee, who were now engaged in complex snow chair engineering. You told me once, maybe the second year we knew each other, about what it was like trying to get your first investors to take you seriously. The specific thing you said was, you said the first guy looked over your shoulder the entire meeting, like he was waiting for the actual person to arrive. Sophia was quiet. And you said you built the company so that nobody could ever look over your shoulder again. He kept his eyes on Lily. I never forgot that. I always knew why it mattered. The silence after that was a different kind again. Longer. He was aware he'd said something that went past the careful perimeter they'd been operating inside, and he wasn't sure whether he regretted it. Nathan, lunch is probably ready, he said. Lily, come on, bug. He went inside before she could finish the sentence, which was not his most mature moment. He knew it wasn't. He could feel it in the way she didn't call after him. She never chased. That had always been true of her. She let people go when they needed to go and waited to see if they came back. He'd always found that quality equal parts admirable and infuriating. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink and told himself it was fine. Lunch was a gathering around the long table again, all 10 of them, with soup Claire had made from scratch that morning and bread from the bakery in town she'd brought up in a cooler. Nathan sat between Lily and his mother, which was its own specific challenge, because his mother had apparently decided that the mountain retreat was an appropriate setting for a series of quiet, pointed observations about his personal life. You seem tired, she said, passing him the breadbasket. I slept fine. You have that look you get. Mom. I'm just saying. You've had that look since you got here. She tore her bread with the deliberate movements of a woman making a point. Is it work? Work is fine. Is it? She glanced down the table in a way that was not even slightly subtle. Other things? Mom. He kept his voice low and even. I'm asking you nicely. She looked at him with the expression she'd had his entire life. The one that meant she was making a decision about how much to say and settling on slightly more than he wanted. I always liked Sophia. I know you did. She's a good person. I know she is. Whatever happened between you two, Mom, I am asking you, nicely. He held her gaze until she made a sound of concession and returned to her soup. He looked back at his own bowl and found he had very little appetite. Down the table, Sophia was talking to Patricia about something work-adjacent that was making Patricia laugh. She had a way in social situations, had always had it, of finding the right register with people quickly. She didn't perform warmth. She was just genuinely interested in people when she gave them her attention, and people felt it. He'd always been a little in awe of that, if he was honest. He'd always had to work at it, the social ease. She made it look like it cost her nothing, which he knew wasn't true, but the appearance of effortlessness was its own skill. His mother put her hand briefly on his arm and didn't say anything else, which, from her, was love. The afternoon brought the promised free hour, and the snow began again in the early part of it. Not dramatically yet, just the leading edge of the system that was parked over the mountains. Nathan used the hour to sit with Lily in their shared room and work through her math homework, which she'd brought because her teacher had specifically said, "You don't have to do this over winter break." And Lily had interpreted that as, "This is optional, but I choose to do it." "I don't know why you brought it," he said, looking at a fraction problem. "I wanted to. Of your own free will." "Dad?" "Yes." She erased something vigorously. "Is it weird that Sophia is here?" He kept his eyes on the problem sheet. "Why would it be weird? You used to talk to her every day. Then you stopped. And now she's here and you keep looking at each other and then looking away fast." She said it with the matter-of-fact directness she applied to everything, holding her pencil and looking at him with clear brown eyes. "It's noticeable. It's a complicated situation. Because you had a fight? Because adults sometimes, things get complicated. You say that when you don't want to explain something. That's what it's for." Lily looked at him for another moment, then looked back at her math. "She asked me about you," she said casually, "yesterday, when you were moving furniture." Nathan set down the problem sheet. "What did she ask?" "Just, like, was your work going well? Were you still designing buildings?" Lily shrugged with the studied nonchalance of a 7-year-old reporting information she understood was significant. "Normal stuff," she said. "She said you were the best person she knew at making things that were supposed to last." He was quiet for a moment. "She said that?" "Yeah." Lily erased another answer and started again. "I thought it was a nice thing to say." He picked the problem sheet back up. His hands were mostly steady. "Yeah," he said. "It was. Buswas ma seats." The storm arrived in earnest around 4 in the afternoon. You could hear the wind shift before you could fully see it in the snow. A different register, lower, with some force behind it. The flakes coming down changed from the loose, wandering kind to something more horizontal and deliberate. By 4:30, the backfield was disappearing into white, and the visibility to the tree line was dropping. Derek came in from an ill-advised attempt to check on the cars and announced that the road was, as he'd predicted, done for the night. "County closed it at 3, he said, stomping snow off his boots. "We're here until tomorrow at the earliest, probably afternoon." Claire, to her credit, received this information with complete serenity. "I told everyone to bring enough for an extra day," she said. "We're fine on food. The generator is full. This is going to be great." Marcus looked at his fiancée with the patient adoration of a man who had already made peace with marrying someone who found being snowed in on a mountain great. "Sure," he said. "Yeah." "It is great," Lily said, with her face pressed to the window. "See?" Claire said. The evening gathering had a different quality to it than the night before. Looser, maybe, the way groups get when there's nowhere to go and nothing to perform. Patricia's husband produced a bottle of very good bourbon that he apparently carried with him to family events like a kind of social infrastructure. And Marcus built the fire up large and the living room got warm and a little loud in a way that felt genuinely comfortable rather than performed. Nathan had one pour of the bourbon and nursed it for 2 hours and mostly listened. He was good at that. He noticed the room's dynamics the way he sometimes noticed structural dynamics in buildings. Which load-bearing elements were doing real work, which joints were under stress, where the energy was actually moving. His mother held court with Patricia, and they discovered a shared opinion about something garden-related that apparently constituted a profound connection. Derek and Marcus's cousin played some increasingly competitive card game at the table. Lily had fallen asleep on the braided rug again, curled around a throw pillow, and Bee was asleep beside her, and they looked like two small mammals that had decided to hibernate in front of the fire. Sophia was on the far end of the big couch, holding a glass of wine, mostly quiet. She'd been present in the conversation. She wasn't withdrawing, wasn't hiding, but she was operating at a lower wattage than her normal social register. And Nathan, sitting in the wingback chair on the other side of the fireplace, caught himself watching her when she looked elsewhere. The room began thinning out around 9. Patricia's husband declared the bourbon experiment a success and retired. Derek's card game ended in a disputed outcome that neither party was willing to formalize. Claire went around turning off lights with the efficiency of someone with a wedding in 3 days who needed sleep, and people drifted toward their rooms in ones and twos. Nathan carried Lily to her bed. She barely stirred, which was impressive given that he'd navigated 2 doorways and a narrow hallway, and tucked her in and stood over her for a moment in the dark. She was deeply, completely asleep. One hand curved next to her face, and she looked so much like herself at 3 years old that he had the specific feeling that came sometimes, unexpectedly, when he watched her sleep. The combination of love and terror that was parenthood distilled. He'd been doing this alone for 4 years. He didn't talk about the alone part because it felt self-pitying, but sometimes it was just a lot to carry in one direction. He closed her door and stood in the hall. Down the hall, the room light was on. He could see the thin stripe of it under the door. He stood there for longer than he should have, hand not quite on the doorknob, and thought about his daughter, saying she was the best person she knew at making things that were supposed to last. And then he opened the door and went in. Sophia was at the small desk in the corner. Not the laptop this time, a legal pad, covered in her handwriting, the small, tight cursive she'd always used when she was working through something she needed to see in her own hand rather than on a screen. She looked up when he came in. "Hey," she said. "Hey." He sat on the edge of his bed. The storm was audible from in here, the wind against the window glass, the occasional creak of the roof timber. "How bad is the work thing? Really?" She set down her pen, considered him. "One of my directors wants to take the company in a direction I fundamentally disagree with, and he's been building support for his position with the board for 3 months while telling me he's aligned with my strategy." A pause. "I found out 2 weeks ago." "That's not a work problem," Nathan said. "That's a betrayal problem." Something shifted in her expression. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It is. How are you handling it?" "I'm writing down every argument he's going to make before Monday's call, so when he makes them, I've already addressed them." She looked at the legal pad. "And I'm trying not to let it make me feel stupid for trusting him." "You're not stupid for trusting people. I've been called naive for it. By people who'd rather not be trusted because then they can't fail at it." He looked at his hands. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a long moment. The storm pushed at the window. "Nathan," her voice was careful, deliberate, the way she got when she'd been thinking about something for a while and had decided to say it. "Why did you never, after everything, why didn't you call me? To ask? To let me explain?" He felt it land, didn't look away from it. "Because I was angry. I know you were angry, but you and I, 6 years, you just—" She stopped, steadied. "You just ended it, like it was easy." "It wasn't easy." The words came out harder than he meant them to. "You think that was easy? I drove home that night and I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 45 minutes because I couldn't make myself go upstairs." Sophia was very still. "I found out from Jake Mercer," he said, "at a work event. He said, 'Oh, you must be so proud of Sophia. That overseas role is incredible.' And I had no idea what he was talking about. I stood there and I made something up, and then I went home and I didn't know how to—" He stopped. "You were supposed to be my person, and you were leaving, and you hadn't told me. That was the part I couldn't get past." The room was quiet except for the storm. "I know," Sophia said. Her voice was low and completely undefended. "I know. And I was wrong. I handled it wrong. I was scared, and I made a decision to accept the role before I'd processed what it meant. And every day after that, I told myself I'd call you and explain. And every day I didn't. And by the time I worked up to it enough to call, you were already gone. You'd already pulled back. She pressed her hands flat on the legal pad. And I thought you'd heard and decided that was it, that you were done. I didn't know you'd called. I called 4 times, she said, the week after the parking garage. I left 2 messages. He looked at her. Something cold moved through him. What? 4 calls, 2 voicemails. She looked back at him steadily. You never responded. I never... He stopped, pulled out his phone, not entirely sure why, some reflex. I never got... And then it hit him. He remembered it clearly and suddenly, the way you remember something that happened in a moment of pure anger, sitting in the parking garage for 45 minutes and then going upstairs and sitting on his couch in the dark and picking up his phone and blocking her number with the decisiveness of someone trying to stop bleeding by cauterizing the wound. He'd done it, and then he'd gone to bed, and by morning he'd been in the part of grief that looks like function, going to work, making Lily's lunch, doing the next thing, and he'd never unblocked it. He'd forgotten he'd done it. Sophia watched his expression change. She knew him well enough to track it. She saw the moment the realization arrived. Nathan, she said carefully. I blocked your number, he said, the night of the parking garage. I blocked it, and He set the phone down. I forgot. I never unblocked it. The silence that followed was the heaviest of the weekend. Outside, the storm pressed against the glass with steady, indifferent force. Sophia stared at him. He stared back, and somewhere in the space between them, 7 months of silence rearranged itself into an entirely different shape than either of them had been carrying. Neither of them had abandoned the other. They had simply been unreachable. For reasons so mundane and so human, they were almost impossible to believe. Anger, a blocked number, a forgotten phone setting. 7 months of separate grief built on a misunderstanding that could have been cleared in a 5-minute conversation. Sophia looked down at the legal pad. Her handwriting filled most of the page. Arguments and counter-arguments for a Monday morning call that felt very far away from this room, this storm, this moment. Okay, she said finally. It came out rough, like something that had been sitting too long in one position and wasn't sure it could move yet. Yeah, Nathan said. Okay. He didn't know what they were agreeing to exactly. He wasn't sure she did either. But the shape of the next 3 days had just shifted again, and this time he didn't feel the need to go stand on a cold porch about it. He lay back on his bed and looked at the ceiling. The storm moved around the cabin like it was looking for a way in, the pine rafters overhead, knot by knot, familiar now after 2 nights. After a while, Sophia turned off the desk lamp. The room went dark. Your wreath really was terrible, she said. He exhaled, something that wasn't quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. It had character. Nathan, it had problems. Yeah, he said. It did. He didn't sleep well. That wasn't surprising. Nathan lay in the dark for a long time after Sophia's breathing evened out. She'd fallen asleep faster than he would have expected, given what they'd just uncovered, but that was Sophia. Once she made peace with something, she went all the way into it. He'd always envied that about her, the ability to land somewhere and stay there. He circled. He stared at the ceiling and circled the same territory for what felt like most of the night. The blocked number, 4 calls, 2 voicemails he had never heard, 7 months of silence that he'd spent believing was a choice she'd made. A choice he'd made too. Fine, he'd made his own choices. But he'd built the architecture of those choices on a foundation that turned out to be wrong. She thought he wanted her gone. He thought she hadn't fought to stay. Neither thing was true, and the truth was so ordinary, so stupidly human, a blocked number he'd forgotten about in the wreckage of a bad night, that it didn't feel sufficient to account for 7 months of grief. The cause was too small for the damage. That was the part he kept coming back to, lying in the dark while the storm worked on the windows. The disproportion of it. You expected the things that break something important to be appropriately sized. You expected them to be dramatic, or at least deliberate. Not a phone setting made in anger at 11 on a Wednesday night and forgotten by Thursday morning. Sometime around 2, he stopped trying to sleep and just let himself be awake in the dark, and eventually the not trying worked the way it sometimes does, and he was gone before he noticed. He woke at 7 to the sound of Lily knocking on the door, with the specific knock she used when she'd already been up for a while and had been waiting what she considered a reasonable amount of time. "Dad?" He opened his eyes. The room was gray lit. Sophia's bed was already empty. "Yeah, Bug. Hang on." He got up and opened the door, and Lily was standing in the hallway in her socks and the oversized sweater she slept in, holding a piece of paper. "I made a list," she said, "of things we should do today since we're snowed in." He looked at the list. It was numbered to 12. Number 6 was learn something new, flexible. Number 9 was convince someone to make waffles. Number 12 was, in capital letters, snow fort. "This is very organized," he said. "I've been up since 6, she said, with the air of someone who had used the time well. He pulled on jeans and a shirt and followed her to the kitchen, which was already inhabited by Sophia and Claire and the smell of actual coffee being made by someone who knew what they were doing. Sophia was at the counter measuring grounds. Claire was at the table with her own list, which was longer than Lily's and considerably more stressed-looking. "Morning," Sophia said without turning around. "Morning," Nathan said. Claire looked up from her list. She had the expression of someone who had been awake since 5 managing mental logistics. "Roads are still closed. Venue coordinator says Saturday setup is fine because the county plows the main route by noon. We're good." She said it like she was convincing herself as much as reporting facts. "You're good," Nathan said. "Everything's fine." "I know it's fine. I know." She looked back at her list. "I'm fine." Lily sat down across from Claire and placed her own list on the table with quiet solidarity. Claire looked at it. Something in her face softened. "Number 9 is a good idea," Claire said. "I'll make waffles," Sophia said. Nathan looked at the back of her head. She was still at the counter, still measuring, completely even, like last night had been processed and filed, and she'd arrived at this morning knowing exactly where she stood. He envied it again, that capacity. He was still circling. He suspected he'd be circling for a while yet. "I'll get the waffle iron," he said. They moved around each other in the kitchen in the careful way they'd been doing since he arrived, except that this morning the careful had a different quality to it. Less avoidance, more awareness. Like two people who had opened something up the night before and weren't sure yet of the full dimensions of it, but were no longer pretending it was closed. The rest of the house came alive slowly. Derek appeared at 8:30, looking cheerful and untroubled by any emotional complexity whatsoever, and Marcus came down shortly after with his parents, and the kitchen filled up the way it had every morning, with the layered noise of people in various stages of coffee acquisition. Nathan watched Sophia navigate the waffle making, which required the kind of focused, sequential attention she applied to anything that had a correct answer, and thought about what Lily had said yesterday. She was the best person she knew at making things that were supposed to last. He'd been turning that over since Lily told him. It was an odd thing for Sophia to say to a 7-year-old about her father. Or maybe it wasn't odd at all. Maybe it was exactly what she'd meant to say, and she'd said it where she thought it was safe. The waffles were good, not perfect. The first 2 came out slightly underdone because the iron needed longer to heat than Sophia expected, and she said so directly without making it a bigger thing than it was. And by the 3rd one, the temperature was right. Nathan ate 2 and didn't say anything about the first 2, and neither did anyone else, because the first 2 were fine. The snowed-in day had a different rhythm than the scheduled ones. The itinerary Claire had printed was largely irrelevant now. The activities that were supposed to happen outside couldn't, and the ones inside rearranged themselves organically around what people actually wanted to do rather than what had been planned. Derek and Marcus's father figured out that they shared a knowledge of and passion for chess and installed themselves at the small table in the corner of the living room where they would remain, it turned out, for most of the day. Patricia and Claire's mother fell into the particular intimacy of women who were about to become connected by their children's marriage, swapping information and stories with the careful warmth of people who wanted it to work and were willing to put in the effort. Lily completed items 1 through 5 on her list before 11 and began strategizing about item 12. Nathan found himself, in the late morning, sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and his drafting notebook open, not working on anything specific but sketching the way he sometimes did when his hands needed to be doing something while his brain was elsewhere. He'd always thought in shapes. Even as a kid, when something was bothering him, he'd drawn it out. Not what it was, just shapes, lines, structures. The spatial version of journaling, maybe. His college roommate had found it deeply strange. Sophia had understood it immediately, the first time she'd seen him do it. She'd asked what the shapes meant, and he'd said nothing specific, and she'd said, but they mean something, and he'd said, yeah, they do. And she'd said, that's enough, and never pushed it further. He was drawing what looked like a bridge when she sat down across from him. Not the spot she'd sat yesterday, closer. She had her own coffee, and she looked at his notebook without asking, which was always her way with it, looking, not intruding. Bridge? She said. Maybe. He looked at it, or something that spans something. She looked at it another moment. The tension's on the left side. He followed her eye line. She was right. The left suspension was heavier than it needed to be, overcorrecting, trying to hold more than it had to. He added a line on the right to redistribute. Better, she said. They sat with that for a moment. The chess game in the corner had produced a low, concentrated silence, punctuated by the occasional click of a piece on the board. Snow was still coming down outside, lighter now, the back end of the storm rather than the front. I want to say something, Sophia said, and I want you to let me finish before you respond. He looked up from the notebook. Okay. I should have told you about the overseas role. She had her hands wrapped around her mug, very still. I should have told you first, before I told my board, before I told my family. You were... She stopped, and he could see her deciding how precise to be. You were the person I would have told first about anything real, and I didn't. And I've thought about why a lot in the past 7 months, because you deserved an explanation, not just an apology. He waited. I was scared, she said, which is, I know how that sounds coming from me. I know I don't present as someone who gets scared by things, but the role was, it was the thing I'd been working toward for years, and it was overseas. And when it became real, when it was actually happening, all I could think about was what it meant. She looked at her coffee. What it meant for everything, not just work things, everything. Sophia, I'm not done. She looked back up. I told myself I needed to decide about the role first, and then tell you because I didn't. I was afraid that if I told you before I decided, I would decide differently. A pause. And I wasn't ready to understand what that meant. The chess game produced a quiet deliberation from Derek's end of the board. Outside, a branch somewhere shed its load of snow, and the sound of it was a muffled thump. You were afraid I'd talk you out of it, Nathan said. I was afraid I'd talk myself out of it. She set down her mug with a small, precise movement. Because of you. Because of what we were. She looked at him with the specific steadiness she used when she was making herself be honest about something she'd rather not be. And I didn't know what to do with that, so I made the choice in a vacuum and told myself I'd explain after, and then everything fell apart before I got the chance. He absorbed that. Let it settle. I spent 6 years, he said slowly, understanding that your work was important. I never once asked you to choose. I know. I wouldn't have asked you to choose. I know that now. Her voice was quiet, but not fragile. I didn't know it clearly enough then. My first company failed because I let someone talk me out of a decision I knew was right. And I'd built a whole set of rules around that, about deciding from my own center and not from what other people needed from me. She looked down at her hands. You weren't other people. You were the exception, and I didn't have a rule for the exception, and so I broke something trying to protect both things at once. The honesty of that sat between them like something physical. Nathan had spent 7 months with a version of this story that was simpler, a version where he'd been not important enough to be told, where the friendship had been, on her side, something more casual than he'd understood it to be. That version had been painful, but it had also been clean. It had a clear shape. It didn't require him to look at his own part in it. This version was messier. This version required him to look at the phone he'd blocked her number on and the 7 months he'd spent not asking questions. I blocked your number the night of the parking garage, he said. I told you that last night. But I didn't tell you the why of it. He closed the notebook. I did it because I was trying to stop myself from calling you. She looked at him. I was furious, he said, and I was also about 30 seconds from calling you every 5 minutes, and I knew it, so I blocked the number to remove the option. And then I went to bed, and in the morning I was he searched for the word, in that mode, where you just do the next thing, make the lunches, go to work, get through the day. And I forgot I'd done it. I genuinely forgot. For 7 months. I never had a reason to check. He heard how that sounded and kept going. I told myself you hadn't called. Every time I thought about it, which was, he paused, often. I told myself you'd made your choice and moved on, and I needed to do the same. He looked at the table. I didn't consider that there might be another explanation. That's on me. The room around them had shifted in that way rooms shift when people are having a conversation with real weight in it. Not louder or quieter, but somehow more present. Nathan was aware of the chess game and the murmured conversation from the other room, but they were far away. Where are you now? He said. With the roll. Are you still going overseas? Sophia looked at him for a moment, and something in her expression changed. Not dramatically. It was a small change. A slight shift in what she was holding behind her eyes, and he couldn't read it clearly enough to know what it meant. There's something I haven't told you, she said. Okay. I accepted the role, she said. You know that part. I accepted it, and I started the transition process. And then everything happened. The parking garage, the silence, all of it. She turned her mug in her hands. And I kept working through the transition, because that was what I did. I worked. That was my answer to everything. He waited. My departure date was October 17th. She held his gaze. I had a flight. I had an apartment in Zurich. I had a transition team waiting. She stopped. I didn't get on the plane. The chess game clicked. The snow fell. You didn't, Nathan started. I got to the airport, she said. I had my bags. I was checked in. I was sitting in the gate and She stopped again, and this time it wasn't for effect. It was because she was working out how to say something true without oversimplifying it. I was sitting in the gate and I kept thinking about a conversation we'd had, maybe 2 years ago. You were working on a renovation project, an old building, and you were trying to decide whether to preserve the original structure or take it down and start clean. And you said, she looked at him, you said sometimes the most important thing is knowing what you're actually walking away from, not what you're walking away from on paper, the real thing. Nathan remembered that conversation. He remembered it clearly. A Thursday evening, his drafting table covered in old blueprints, Sophia cross-legged on his couch with her laptop, listening while he thought out loud the way he only did with her. So I sat in the gate, she said, and I asked myself what I was actually walking away from. Not on paper, the real thing. She looked at him steadily. And I couldn't get on the plane. He didn't say anything for a long moment. You've been here, he said. This whole time. I've been here. Running the expansion from the US. We restructured. It's actually working better. Some of the board resisted, but the outcomes have been solid. A small, wry, half smile. Turns out you don't have to physically relocate to lead an international expansion in 2024. Who knew? Sophia. He said her name without knowing what he meant to follow it with. I know, she said. I know what you're going to say. You don't, actually. She looked at him, waiting. I was going to say that I wish you'd... He stopped, started over. I spent 7 months thinking you were in Zurich. I spent 7 months thinking you'd gone. And you were here. The whole time. I was in New York, she said quietly. Same as always. Something shifted in his chest. Not painfully exactly, but with the specific pressure of something large realigning. You could have... I know. You could have come to me after you decided to stay. You knew where I was. You'd blocked my number. Her voice was even, but not quite steady. I didn't know that then. I just knew you weren't responding, and I thought... She looked away briefly, then back. I thought you'd made your feelings clear, that you didn't want me in your life, and I had enough pride. She said it like it cost something. I had enough pride to not show up somewhere I wasn't wanted. You were wanted. The words came out before he decided to say them, direct and unqualified, and he didn't walk them back. That was never... Sophia, I was angry. I was hurt. But you were wanted. You were... He stopped himself. Because the next thing was bigger than what they'd been saying, and they were in his sister's dining room with 10 other people 30 feet away, and he wasn't... He needed to think about the next thing before he said it. Okay, Sophia said. Her voice was softer than it had been. She'd heard the stop. She wasn't pushing past it. Nathan opened his notebook again and looked at the bridge without seeing it. His hands weren't entirely steady, and he didn't try to draw anything. Does Claire know, he asked, that you didn't go? She knows I'm still in New York. She doesn't know the full... Sophia paused. The full interior of the decision. She invited you here knowing things were unresolved between us. She invited me here, Sophia said, because she's Claire. Which was complete. Which covered everything. He almost laughed, and didn't, but the pressure of it was there. Lily appeared from the direction of the back door in full snow gear, dragging Bea behind her. Dad, I need a structural consultant. He blinked, coming back to the room. What? The snow fort. The left wall keeps collapsing, and Bea thinks we need a base layer, but I think we need to change the angle of the... She made a hand gesture indicating some architectural element he couldn't quite visualize. He looked at Lily, then at Sophia, then at Lily. Give me 5 minutes, he said. 4, Lily negotiated. 5. She went back out with Bea. He could hear them through the glass, continuing the base layer debate with the seriousness it apparently deserved. He looked at Sophia. She was watching Lily through the window with an expression he couldn't name. Not sadness exactly, but something adjacent to longing. Something that was looking at something it had been away from and was only now understanding how much it had missed. I need to go assess a structural failure, he said. I know. But I want to... He stopped, tried again. I don't want to leave this in the middle. I want to, tonight. When things are quieter, can we... Yes, she said. She didn't make him finish the sentence. Tonight. He nodded, got up, found his coat on the hook by the back door and went outside into the cold white morning to look at his daughter's snow fort. The left wall was, he confirmed, suffering from a foundational angle problem. Lily had been right about that, and Bea had been right about the base layer, and they were not in fact mutually exclusive solutions, which Nathan explained while packing snow at the base of the structure with his gloveless hands, because he'd left his gloves inside and he wasn't going back in for them. You're not wearing gloves, Lily observed. I noticed. That's not very structural consultant behavior. Structural consultants make all kinds of choices. She handed him a spare pair from her pocket, which she had because she always brought a spare pair of everything on principle, and he put them on and they worked on the wall together for a while, the 3 of them, and the cold air was good for him. Straightforward. His hands knew what to do with the snow. Pack it, shape it, reinforce the base, and his brain could run in the background working on the other thing. She hadn't gotten on the plane. October 17th. He'd been here, in the city, doing his regular life, working, raising Lily, getting through November and then December in the quiet of thinking he was managing things fine because motion was management. And she'd been 20 blocks away in the same city, also managing things fine, both of them separated by a blocked phone number and too much pride to show up uninvited. The waste of it was what got him. Not tragically, he was past the dramatic register of it. It was too cold outside for the dramatic register. Just the specific human waste of it. The time that didn't have to go the way it went. He packed snow and thought about 10 seconds he'd had in a parking garage when he was angry enough to block a number, and how those 10 seconds had somehow become 7 months. The snow fort's left wall held. Lily and Bea stood back to assess it and declared it structurally sound, and Lily gave Nathan a nod of professional respect that was so perfectly calibrated she must have absorbed it from somewhere, probably him. Good work, she said. Thank you, he said. You had the right instinct about the angle. She looked pleased. I know. He went back inside and washed his hands and found his cold coffee and drank it without reheating it, standing at the kitchen counter alone for a few minutes while the house moved around him. His mother was somewhere in the living room. He could hear her voice, the particular cadence of her in a story. Claire was on the phone. Work, probably. The venue coordinator, her voice controlled and pleasant in the way it got when she was working very hard to be controlled and pleasant. The day had its own pace, and he let it have it. Lunch happened around the big table, the group of them comfortable now in a way they hadn't quite been 2 days ago. The specific ease that comes from people being stranded together, sharing meals, the edges of formality worn down by proximity and a common situation. Derek had beaten Marcus's father at chess and then lost the rematch, and they were on the third game with a severity that suggested the outcome actually mattered to both of them. Nathan sat beside his mother at lunch, which was his own choice, and she didn't say anything about Sophia, and he didn't either, and they had a genuinely good conversation about his work and hers. She'd retired from teaching 3 years ago and had taken up furniture restoration with the thoroughness she'd applied to her classroom. She described a sideboard she was in the middle of, the original finish coming up with solvent and the wood underneath being better than she'd expected. He listened to it and thought about what it meant to take something apart and find it was sounder than you thought. After lunch, the light shifted. Afternoon came in through the west-facing windows, and the snow outside took on that particular gold tint of late December sun through clouds, and the cabin felt full of it. Patricia's husband fell asleep in the wingback chair with a quiet authority. The chess game was suspended for a respite period. Lily and Bea were in Lily's room doing something that involved the sound of paper tearing and enthusiastic but muffled debate. Nathan sat in the living room with a book he wasn't reading and let the afternoon pass. Sophia was on the couch across from him, the legal pad in her lap this time, rather than just the laptop. She'd been alternating, he'd noticed, screen for the tactical and paper for the strategic, which was exactly how she'd always worked when something needed both sides of her. She wrote for a while, crossed something out, wrote again. She looked up once and found him looking. He didn't look away. She didn't either, for a moment, and then they both went back to what they were doing, and that particular moment sat between them without needing to be defined. His mother was watching. Nathan knew she was watching because his mother had been watching him since he was 6 years old, and he'd learned to feel it the same way you learn to feel weather. He didn't acknowledge it, and she had the grace today to keep it to herself. The late afternoon brought what Claire called the non-rehearsal rehearsal, which in practice was everyone getting slightly more dressed than usual and gathering in the main room for what was clearly a dinner Claire had spent most of the day organizing in the background of everything else. She'd found candles somewhere in the cabin's supply closet. The table was set with more intention than the previous meals. There was wine, and there was food that had required actual cooking and not just assembly, and the whole thing had the quality of Claire loving people in the language she spoke best, which was provision. Nathan wore his good shirt, the one he'd hung up on the first day. He came into the main room and Sophia was already there, standing near the fireplace talking to Marcus's mother, and she was wearing something he hadn't seen her wear over the weekend, a deep rust-colored top that he didn't have the vocabulary for beyond the fact that it wasn't her normal work register, and it suited her. She'd done something with her hair, not dramatically different, just down rather than pulled back, the way it had been in the Adirondack chair when he'd first arrived and stood in the parking lot 3 seconds too long. She didn't look at him when he came in. Patricia said something and Sophia laughed, that same left-of-center laugh, and Nathan went to find a glass of wine and told himself he was managing things fine. Dinner was long and warm. The candles on the table made everything softer. Claire made a toast about family being the people you choose as much as the people you're given. And Marcus made a toast that was short and genuine and clearly improvised. And Nathan's mother made a toast that was technically about Claire and Marcus, but managed to cover in its winding way her own feelings about family and time and the things worth holding on to, and Nathan listened to it and felt it land in the specific place those things land when you're already raw. Lily, seated between Nathan and Patricia, ate with enthusiasm and said at one point, to the table in general, "This is the best trip," in the way she said things. Simple, complete, already certain. The table received this warmly. Nathan looked at his daughter and thought about all the things she didn't know yet about this weekend and might someday understand differently. After dinner, the group spread back to the living room and the evening arranged itself in the loose, comfortable way of the night before, but quieter. People were tired. The storm day had cost something even in its pleasantness. By 9:30, people were beginning the slow drift toward rooms, Derek's card game not materializing, the chess rematch tabled until tomorrow. Nathan put Lily to bed and sat with her longer than usual, not because she needed it, but because he did. She let him. She was tired enough to accept the company without making it into something. He sat on the edge of her bed while she wound down, and she told him about the snow fort and the base layer debate, and he listened to all of it. "Dad," she said when she was almost gone. "Yeah, I like it here." "Me too, Bug." "Even the complicated parts?" He looked at her. Her eyes were barely open. "What complicated parts?" "The adult stuff," she said, already mostly asleep. "It's okay. Complicated stuff works out." He sat with that for a moment, his 7-year-old speaking with the serenity of someone who had not yet learned to doubt the outcome. "Yeah," he said. "It usually does." He turned off her lamp and sat in the dark for a minute, and then he went back down the hall. The house was quiet. The last light under Claire's door. The chess table abandoned. The candles from dinner blown out and the kitchen clean. Someone had cleaned it, probably Sophia. She did that when she was thinking. Cleaned things, ordered things, returned them to their right places. He found the main room empty and the fire low and the room lit only by it, and Sophia was on the back porch again. He could see her through the glass. Dark coat, both hands around something, looking at the mountain in the dark. He got his coat and went outside. The cold hit clean and immediate. The storm was fully done and the sky had opened into a clarity that only comes after weather. Black and very deep, with more stars visible than Nathan had seen in years. He'd forgotten that was possible. He'd spent too long in the city. Sophia didn't turn around when he came out, but she moved slightly, shifted her weight, made room, the way you do when you know someone is coming and you want them to know there's space. He stood beside her at the railing. The mountain was there in the dark, white and enormous and very still. She said, "Complicated stuff works out," he said. "Lily, just now." Sophia smiled at the mountain. "She's right. She's 7. 7-year-olds are right about a lot of things." She looked at him sideways. "You said you wanted to talk when things were quieter." He looked at the stars for a moment, all that specific distance between things and the light still getting through. "I don't know how to do this cleanly," he said. "I want you to know that. I don't have a speech. I don't want a speech. I spent 7 months," he said, "being angry at a version of what happened that wasn't true. And some of the anger was real. Some of it was about real things, things that actually happened. But some of it was scaffolding. It was holding up a version of the story where you chose to go and I chose to stay, and that was the shape of it." He turned to look at her, and that wasn't the shape of it. Sophia was very still. "You didn't choose to leave me," he said, "and I didn't choose to let you go. We were both in the dark, and neither of us thought to turn on a light." She looked at him. Something in her face had come undone from its careful maintenance. Not dramatically, not with any particular visible event, just the quiet dissolution of the things she'd been holding in place since the Adirondack chair 2 days ago. "Nathan, I'm not done," he said. She waited. "I'm not going to pretend that I figured everything out today. I haven't. I don't fully know what to do with all of it." He held her gaze. "But I know that I'm tired of operating on wrong information, and I know that whatever I was trying to protect myself from these last 7 months, I don't think it's the thing I was afraid of." The mountain was very white in the dark. Somewhere in the trees below the slope, something moved. A branch, an animal, the aftermath of the storm settling. "What were you afraid of?" Sophia asked. He looked at her for a long moment. The firelight from the cabin reached them faintly through the glass, barely enough to see by. "You," he said, "the specific thing you are to me. I've been afraid of it for a while." He let that sit. "I think you know that." She held his gaze. He could see the moment it landed. The steadiness didn't break, but something behind it shifted, opened. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think I do." The stars were very bright. The cold was clean and serious, and neither of them moved to go inside. That was where they stayed, Not resolved, not finished, not clean. Just two people standing in the dark after a storm, finally in the same true version of the story. Which, it turned out, was exactly enough for one night. They stayed on the porch until the cold became something they couldn't reasonably ignore anymore. It wasn't a decision exactly, more like the temperature made it for them, the December air tightening around 10:30 until Sophia's breath was coming out in visible clouds, and Nathan's fingers had gone from cold to the particular numbness that stops feeling like a sensation and starts feeling like an absence. She said, "Okay," inside, and he said, "Yeah," and they went in. The cabin was dark except for the low lamp in the hallway and the orange remnant of the fire, which had burned down to coals. Nathan went and put 2 more logs on it out of habit. It was something his hands knew how to do, and he needed his hands to have something to do. Sophia stood near the couch in her coat, watching him, and when the logs caught and the light went up a little, she sat down on the far end of the couch and pulled her knees up, not closing herself off, just finding a position that was comfortable rather than performative. He sat on the other end. Not far. This couch was not a large couch. The fire worked on the logs and the room got warmer by degrees, and neither of them said anything immediately, which would have felt wrong 2 nights ago and didn't feel wrong now. They'd moved through enough tonight that the silence had changed character. It was the silence of people who had said something real and were now sitting with the weight of it before the next real thing. "That word you used," Sophia said eventually. Her voice was quiet, the rest of the house thoroughly asleep around them. "Scaffolding." He looked at her. "You said some of the anger was scaffolding." She turned her mug. She'd picked it up from somewhere, tea this time, he hadn't noticed her make it, in her hands. "That's a specific word for it. It's the right word." He looked at the fire. "When I'm working on a building and the actual structure isn't ready to support itself yet, you put up scaffolding, temporary framework. It holds the shape while the real thing gets built." He paused. "I think I built an explanation for what happened that was really just holding the shape of something, keeping me functional while I didn't deal with the actual thing. The actual thing being that losing you was..." He stopped, found the honest version rather than the comfortable one. "It was the hardest thing I've dealt with in a long time, and I had to make it manageable. So I made it into a narrative where it was your fault and my response was reasonable and I was doing fine, because that version had an architecture to it. It stood up." Sophia was quiet for a moment. The fire popped. "I did the same thing," she said. "My version was that I'd made a mistake and you'd responded to it by confirming what I was always afraid of. Which was that if I was too much, too ambitious, too focused on work, too..." She gestured vaguely. "To myself, people leave." She said it without drama, like a thing she'd looked at enough times that she'd stopped needing to dress it up. "It was easy to make you into evidence of that. You walking away fit the pattern I'd been afraid of since before I knew you." "Sophia." He said her name with something in it he didn't try to identify out loud. "I didn't walk away because you were too much. I know that now. You were never too much." He looked at her. "You were the right amount. You were the specific person I wanted in my life because of how you were, not despite it." She looked at the fire. Her jaw worked slightly, the way it did when she was holding something in. He'd seen it in meetings when someone said something condescending to her and she chose not to respond. Except this wasn't that. This was different. This was something she was holding because she wasn't sure yet what to do with it. "I built Valence from nothing," she said. "You know that. 17 people in a rented office in Midtown, and I didn't take a salary for the first 2 years. I know how to do hard things. I know how to carry weight." She finally looked at him. "But the thing that wrecked me this year, more than the restructuring, more than the director situation, more than the Zurich decision, was not knowing if you were okay." He held her gaze. "I didn't know if Lily was okay," she said. "I didn't know if the project you were working on in the fall came together. I didn't know if you'd slept enough, or if you'd taken any actual time off, or if anyone was making sure you ate something that wasn't coffee and protein bars at your drafting table." She stopped. "That sounds like I wasn't surveilling you. I know what you mean." "It's the specific knowledge," she said. You lose someone important, and you don't just lose them. You lose your access to whether they're okay. He nodded. I know. He looked at his hands. I thought about calling you every time something happened. Good and bad, and just neutral. In September, Lily's school called me about a situation with another kid, and I had 45 minutes of not knowing what was going on. And the whole time I was in the car driving over there, the only person I wanted to call was you. Nathan, it turned out to be nothing. Playground thing, completely resolved by the time I got there. But those 45 minutes. He shook his head. You were the person I wanted. And I couldn't call you because I thought you were in Zurich. And more than that, I thought you'd chosen Zurich over being someone who I could call. The fire was steady now, the new logs caught and burning clean. The cabin breathed around them, the particular sound of an old building in winter, the ticks and settlings of wood in cold air. I want to ask you something, Nathan said, and I want you to answer it without protecting me from the answer. Sophia straightened slightly. Okay. When you were in the airport, gate, whatever gate it was, when you decided not to get on the plane, he chose his next words carefully. Was I the reason? Directly. Not the idea of unfinished business or the conversation about buildings or a general sense that things weren't resolved. Was I the reason? The fire threw light across her face. She looked at him without blinking. Yes, she said, flat and clean and no qualification attached to it. The word landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. Yes, she said again, quieter. It was you. Specifically you. The idea of being in Zurich and not the idea of building something that big on the other side of the world and not being able to tell you about it. She looked down at her tea. Every milestone I hit at Valence, you're the first person I wanted to call. Every time something went badly, same thing. And I sat in that gate and I thought, if I get on this plane, I'm choosing a life where I build things alone and I tell myself that's fine because that's what I've always done. She looked back up. And I didn't want that life anymore. I think I'd been not wanting it for a while. I just needed the gate and the boarding call and the specific weight of what I was about to do to make it obvious. He looked at her for a long moment. The person he'd known for 6 years, who had sat across from him at his drafting table and read his structural drawings upside down and laughed at her own jokes a beat too late, and answered his calls at midnight when a project was going sideways and sent him articles he might like with no message attached, because she knew he didn't always need the commentary, just the thing itself. The person who had made a decision in an airport that she'd never told him about and carried it alone for 7 months, same as he'd carried his version of the silence. I have to tell you something too, he said. She waited. There's a version of this, he said, where I'm careful, where I say something like, I need time, or we should take this slowly, or let's just see what this is before we name it. He looked at her steadily. I'm not going to do that. Her expression shifted. Careful. Like someone who wanted to let themselves hear something but wasn't quite sure it was safe yet. I have been, he said, for a long time. Longer than this year. Longer than the parking garage. I have been telling myself that what I had with you was exactly what it looked like. A friendship. A very good friendship. Maybe the best I've had with another adult, but bounded by that word and that word only. He paused. I told myself that because the alternative was complicated. You were my friend. You were important, and I was afraid that if I let it be more than that in my own head, I'd ruin the thing I had. Nathan. She said his name very quietly, so I called it friendship, and I believed myself most of the time. And the other times I just redirected. And then you were gone, and I was angry enough that the other thing didn't have room to exist, or I told myself it didn't. He held her gaze. I'm tired of redirecting. The room was very still. I love you, he said. Not as a declaration requiring an immediate response, not as a bid, but as a piece of true information that had been taking up space in him for too long. I know this is not a simple situation, and I know we have things to figure out, and I'm not asking you to have the whole answer right now, but I'm done carrying that around like a secret for myself. Sophia's hands were very still around her mug. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before, or had seen maybe in small fragments and individual moments, and hadn't let himself add up to the sum it clearly was. "I've been in love with you," she said, "for at least 3 years. Probably longer. The 3 years is just when I stopped being able to pretend I wasn't." He exhaled. It wasn't quite a sound. It was what happens when you've been holding something tightly for a very long time and someone takes it from you carefully. 3 years, he said. "I am not proud of how long it took me to be honest with myself about it," she said. "In my defense, I was very busy building a company." "In your defense," he said, and almost smiled. She did smile briefly, and then it became something more serious again. "I don't want to be careful either," she said. "I've been careful for 3 years, and it got me an airport gate in October, and 7 months of not knowing if you were eating properly." She looked at him with the directness she usually reserved for boardrooms, except this was nothing like a boardroom. "I want to be honest, even when the honest thing is complicated or unfinished or not perfectly formed yet. I want that to be how we do this." "That's how we do this," he said, "even when it's inconvenient." "Especially then." She nodded. One small, definitive nod, like the closing of an agreement between two people who understood contracts. They sat with it for a while. The fire, the quiet house, the mountain outside, white and present. Indifferent to them, in the way large things are indifferent, not unkindly but simply from a different scale. "This is going to be," Nathan started. "Complicated," Sophia said. "I was going to say real." "Real," she repeated. "Yes." A pause. "I like real better." "It is complicated, though," he said. "I have Lily. My work is here. Yours is here too now, but the expansion is you're managing offices across 6 time zones. 7, she said. We added Singapore in November. 7 time zones. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not someone who I can't do something halfway, Sophia, especially not with," he gestured between them, "this. I don't have the emotional architecture for halfway." "I know that about you." She looked at him directly. "I've known that since about the 4th month we knew each other. It's one of the things She stopped, recalibrated. "It's one of the things about you that matters to me. A lot. So we have to be serious about this." "I am already serious about this," she said. "I turned down Zurich. I'm not saying I know what you're saying." Her voice was patient. "You're saying you need this to be a real conversation, not just a moment that feels significant tonight and diffuses by morning." She tilted her head. "I'm saying I already had the hard conversation, alone, in an airport, before you knew any of this was happening. The question of whether I'm serious is not the question." He looked at her. "The question," she said, "is whether we can figure out how to actually do this, which is a real question, which requires actual answers." She picked up her mug and realized it had gone cold and set it back down. "But it's not a question I'm afraid of." "I'm not afraid of it either," he said. I want to be honest that I'm walking into this with some," he paused, "some construction debris from the last year. I'm not the most uncomplicated version of myself right now." She looked at him with something that was not quite amusement and not quite tenderness, but was somewhere in that neighborhood. "Nathan, I've seen you at every level of complicated for 6 years. The construction debris is familiar territory. I have a 7-year-old who asks extremely direct questions. I know. She asked me this morning if I was the person who used to be your friend and what happened, and I told her grown-up stuff, and she told me that was a non-answer, and she was right." He stared at her. "She asked you again?" "She's thorough." Sophia's expression was genuine warmth, specific and unperformed. "She's going to be a formidable person." "She already is." He looked toward the hallway where his daughter was asleep in the dark. "She told me tonight that complicated stuff works out." "She's right." "You said that before." "I know. I agree with her." Sophia shifted slightly on the couch, turning toward him a little more, crossing her legs, settling in the way she did when she'd decided to occupy a space rather than just pass through it. "Can I tell you something about the past 7 months? Something I haven't said yet?" "Yeah." I threw myself into work, she said. Obviously. That's my default. I restructured the expansion plan, I managed the director situation, I hired a new VP of operations who's been genuinely transformative. All of that. She looked at the fire. And every day, somewhere around 6 in the evening, there was this window where the workday had officially ended, even if I hadn't stopped yet. And in that window, I would think, I should call Nathan, not because something specific had happened, just because that was when I called you. That was our time. She looked back at him. And every day I remembered I couldn't. And every day it was not fine. He thought about his own 6 o'clock windows. The apartment getting quiet as Lily settled into her homework. The specific loneliness of the early evening, which was different from other kinds of loneliness because it had the shape of something missing. 6 o'clock was always when you called, he said. Almost always. Sometimes 5:50 because you were either running ahead of schedule or you'd completely lost track of time. The losing track of time was more common. I know. He looked at her. I know your patterns better than I know most things. She held his gaze. I know yours too. They sat like that for a moment, and it wasn't like the silences of the past 3 days. The careful ones, the avoidant ones, the loaded ones. This one had a different texture. Like being in a room you've rearranged and noticing for the first time that it actually works better this way. The fire was doing well now, steady and low, not dramatic, just warm. Can I ask you something uncomfortable? Nathan said. She raised an eyebrow. Now you're asking permission? It's more uncomfortable than the usual range. Go ahead. Were there, in the past 7 months, was there anyone? He stopped. Looked at the fire. You don't have to answer that. It's not, I don't have any right to. There was one person, she said, for about 6 weeks. In October. She didn't dress it up or apologize for it. It was someone I met through a board connection. Smart, genuinely decent. And about 3 weeks in, he told me I seemed like I was somewhere else whenever I wasn't actively concentrating on the conversation. Nathan said nothing. He wasn't wrong, Sophia said. He was very decent about it, actually. He said it without any accusation. We agreed it wasn't. We were both honest that it wasn't going anywhere, and that was it. She looked at Nathan. Are you okay? Yes, he said, which was mostly true. There was a response that existed somewhere beneath okay that he identified, noted, and set aside because it was not a response he had any standing to have, and he knew it. Thank you for telling me. I told you I wanted honesty. I know. He looked at his hands. There was no one for me. I'm not saying that to score a point. I know you're not. I thought about it, he said, about whether I should. People suggested it. My friend Marcus, not Marcus here, different Marcus, someone from work, kept telling me I should get back out there. I couldn't make myself care about it enough. Because of me, she said, not as a question. Because of you. He didn't qualify it. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that where it needed to go. The clock on the mantel, which Nathan had noticed but not paid attention to before, said 11:40. The fire was reliable and warm. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard settled. I need to sleep, Sophia said. I have the Monday call, and I need to be sharp for it. I know. I want to, she started and then recalibrated. This conversation isn't done. No, he agreed. It isn't. But it's in a better place than it was at the start of the weekend. Significantly, he said. She unfolded herself from the couch and stood. And he stood too, because the moment seemed to require it, and also because his back had started to register the couch's opinion of extended occupancy. They were standing close, closer than they'd been in the room, except for the brief moments of navigating the small shared space of the kitchen, close enough that the conversation had nowhere to hide. Nathan, she said his name like she was testing the weight of the next thing. Yeah. I want to be... She searched for it. I want to be what I actually am to you, not the managed version. Not the version I've been presenting for 7 months, or the version I presented for 3 years before that. Her chin was level, her eyes steady, but he could see the particular courage it took to say it. Sophia, who could face down a hostile board of directors, for whom this was harder. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. I need some time to figure out what I am without the scaffolding. He looked at her. You're the person who reads structural drawings upside down, he said. You're the person who sends articles with no message because you trust me to know why. You're the person who noticed that my left suspension was too heavy before I did. He kept his voice level. You're the person I want to call at 6 o'clock. That's what you are. Start there. Her expression did something complicated and private, and then steadied. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. She stepped forward and hugged him, not as a punctuation mark, not as a romantic gesture, just a hug, the way people hug when they've been in the same difficult territory together for too long and need to acknowledge the physical reality of each other. He put his arms around her, and she was exactly as familiar as she should have been, and he held on a little longer than a quick hug warranted, and she didn't move away until he did. Good night, she said. Good night. She went up the hall. He stood by the fire for a few more minutes, letting it get low, thinking about the shape of the room with her in it, and how different it was from the shape of the room without her. He added one more small log. Not enough to rebuild the fire, just enough to let it take its time going out. Then he went down the hall and pushed open the door to Lily's room, just a few inches, just enough to hear her breathing. She was deeply asleep, her arm hanging off the side of the bed, in the specific chaotic repose of children who hit the mattress and go fully unconscious. He watched her for a moment, the rise and fall of her, this kid who asked impossible questions and brought her own backup gloves and talked about signs when she found someone with the same middle name. She was okay. She was, by all available evidence, more than okay. He pulled the door back to where he'd found it and went to his own room. Sophia was asleep, or almost. Her breathing was shallow still, not fully there yet. He got ready for bed quietly, moving in the dark with the care of someone sharing a space, and lay down and looked at the ceiling and let himself, for the first time in a long time, not try to manage how he felt. He felt a lot of things. Some of them were complicated and unresolved and would require time and real conversations and the specific courage of people choosing not to protect themselves quite as carefully as they had been. Some of them were straightforward. The straightforward ones sat in his chest like something recently returned, familiar and a little sore from the absence and genuinely good. He thought about what she'd said. Start there. He was starting there. Outside, the mountain was still. No wind, no storm, just the deep cold of a December night in the high country, and the stars he'd seen earlier still holding whatever they held at that distance. He couldn't see them from here, from the bed, through the dark window, but he knew they were there. He slept better than he had all weekend. Not perfectly. He woke once at 3 and lay there for 10 minutes cataloging his own thoughts before sleep took him back. But better. Morning came in blue and white and clear, the day before Claire's wedding Saturday, and Nathan was up at 6:30 and in the kitchen before almost anyone else, and he was measuring coffee, getting it right on the first attempt this time, when his mother appeared in her bathrobe. She looked at him. He looked at her. She poured herself a glass of water from the tap. You look different, she said. Mom. Not bad different. She looked at him with the comprehensive attention she'd had for him since he was an infant. Like you slept. I did sleep. You haven't been sleeping. Mom, it's 6:30. I'm your mother, Nathan. I know when you've been sleeping. She leaned against the counter. Something shifted. He looked at the coffee machine. Things were talked about. Good things? He thought about the fire and the honesty and the hug that lasted the right amount of time and his daughter's arm hanging off the side of the bed and 3 years and 7 months and a blocked phone number and an airport gate in October. Yeah, he said. Good things. His mother looked at him for another moment and then nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has been waiting for a specific outcome and has finally seen it begin. She didn't say anything else about it, which was the most loving thing she could have done. And he handed her a coffee when it was ready, and she took it and went to sit by the window. The morning light was full and clean, the kind that only exists after a serious storm has scrubbed the sky. The mountain was white and massive, and the trees below the ridgeline were heavy with snow, and the whole thing looked still enough that you might believe it had always been exactly like this, and always would be. Lily appeared at 7 in her socks, hair chaotic, with the specific energy of a child who has an agenda. "Day 3, she announced to the kitchen. "Day 3, Nathan confirmed. "The snow fort needs maintenance. The snow fort will keep. Not if it gets warm," she pointed at the window. "Sun. It's December. Sun," she repeated. He looked at the window. She had a point. It was genuinely bright out there, and mountain snow in direct sun had a shorter half-life than mountain snow in cloud cover. He looked back at his coffee, which he had not yet drunk any of. "After breakfast," he said. She considered whether to negotiate and decided to accept the terms. She climbed up onto the counter stool and stole a piece of his toast while he was looking at the window. He pretended not to notice because she knew he noticed, and that was the joke, and he was not in the business of explaining jokes. Sophia came in at 7:20 with her laptop under her arm and the legal pad and the expression of someone in pre-call mode, fully present but running 2 processes simultaneously. She poured coffee. She looked at Nathan and said morning, and he said morning back. And his mother, at the window, did not look up from her own coffee, but smiled at exactly the angle where only Nathan could see it. He let it go. Derek appeared. Marcus appeared. Claire appeared from the direction of her room, already on her phone, talking to someone about floral arrangements in a tone that managed to be both pleasant and completely non-negotiable, which was a skill Nathan had always admired. The kitchen filled up. Breakfast happened with its familiar overlapping noise. At one point, Lily, sitting beside Sophia, said without preamble, "Are you and Dad friends again?" The table didn't go quiet. It was too loud for that. But the specific corner of the table got a certain quality of attention. Sophia looked at Lily, then at Nathan, then back at Lily. "We're working on it," she said. Lily processed this. "Is working on it the same as yes?" "It's better than no," Sophia said. Lily considered the logic, found it acceptable, and returned to her eggs. "Okay," she said. "The snow fort needs maintenance after breakfast. You should both help." She said it with the certainty of someone issuing a reasonable directive that would obviously be followed, and then she ate her eggs and Nathan looked at his toast, and across the table his mother had her hand over her mouth, doing an extremely poor job of hiding what was on her face. "Sure," Sophia said. "I'll help." Nathan looked at the window. The sun was bright, and the mountain was white, and the snow was probably, as Lily had correctly identified, already starting to consider its options. "Yeah," he said, "we'll all help." And that was enough for the morning. Not resolved, not finished, not a clean ending to anything. Just 3 people in a snow fort and a December Saturday still ahead, and somewhere in the mess of the last few days something had been set down, and something else had been picked up, and the weight of them was not the same. He drank his coffee while it was still warm. That was new. It was a small thing. But he noticed it. The snow fort maintenance took the better part of the morning. This was partly because the sun had in fact done exactly what Lily predicted. The south-facing wall had softened overnight, and a section of it had slumped into something that was no longer structurally defensible by any reasonable standard. It was partly because B had opinions about the repairs that differed from Lily's opinions in ways that required extended negotiation. And it was partly because Sophia, who had arrived in the backfield in her dark green coat, with her sleeves already pushed up in a way that suggested she intended to actually participate and not just supervise, turned out to have strong and not entirely wrong instincts about snow construction. "You're packing it too hard," she told Lily. Lily looked up from the wall section she was working on. "You have to pack it hard or it doesn't hold. You have to pack it right or it doesn't hold. Too hard and you're creating pressure without cohesion. The snow needs to bond, not compress." Lily stared at her for a moment with the evaluating look she gave anyone who challenged her on technical matters. Then she looked at Nathan. "Is she right?" Nathan was crouching by the base of the compromised wall, assessing. He looked at Sophia. She looked at him. "She's right," he said. Lily turned back to Sophia with a new expression, the one that meant someone had just been provisionally promoted in her estimation. "Show me," she said. So Sophia showed her. She got down in the snow without visible concern for her coat and demonstrated the difference between compressing and bonding, which was a finer distinction than Nathan would have thought a 7-year-old could track. But Lily tracked it with complete attention and then applied it, and the wall section went up cleaner than what had been there before. Nathan watched this from the base of the structure and felt something happen in his chest that he didn't try to name with too much precision. It was the feeling of seeing two things that mattered to him existing in the same place at the same time without either of them being diminished. He'd felt it before in small moments over the 6 years. Sophia on the couch while Lily chattered at her, Sophia teaching Lily a card game she'd learned from her own father, Sophia sending Lily a book in the mail with a note inside that Lily had read so many times the page corners were soft. He'd felt it and filed it and moved on. He didn't move on from it this time. He just let it be what it was. "The corner needs reinforcement," he said. "Left corner, same issue as yesterday." "I see it," Sophia said, already moving. B handed her a double handful of snow with the gravity of a surgical assistant. Sophia accepted it with equal seriousness. Lily, beside Nathan, watched Sophia work on the corner with an expression he recognized. She was memorizing the technique, not just following it. She would do it herself next time without being shown, and she would do it slightly differently because she'd already figured out a modification that she thought improved it. That was his kid. "She's good at stuff," Lily said quietly. Not to him exactly, just to the air. "Yeah," Nathan said, "she is." Nathan shouted. They spent another 40 minutes on the fort and left it in considerably better condition than they'd found it. B declared it perfect, and Lily said it was better than perfect. It was correct, which was the higher standard. Sophia accepted this distinction without irony, and it was so naturally done that Nathan had to look away toward the tree line for a moment. They went inside cold and damp, and his mother had made hot chocolate, with the small marshmallows, preemptively. And they stood in the kitchen and drank it while snow dripped off their coats onto the flagstone floor, and Claire appeared briefly from the hallway and looked at the three of them standing there, and then looked at Nathan with the specific expression of someone who had engineered a situation and was feeling entirely too good about the outcome. He pointed at her. "Don't." She raised both hands in a gesture of pure innocence and went back down the hallway. The day had the quality of a Saturday, which it was, that also had the shape of a last day. Claire's wedding was tomorrow morning, a 10 o'clock ceremony at the venue in town, and then the reception in the afternoon, and Sunday evening most of the guests would disperse back to their real lives. Nathan and Lily would drive back to the city. Sophia would drive back to the city. The Henderson relatives were catching a 7 o'clock flight from the regional airport. The mountain retreat would be done. That fact lived in the background of everything. Not urgently, not as a source of dread, but as a low presence that gave the day a particular intentionality. People were making time for each other. The chess game reached its decisive third conclusion. Claire's mother and Patricia spent an hour on the porch in the afternoon sun with hot tea, wrapped in blankets, talking in the comfortable way of people who had decided they would be friends. Marcus, the night before his wedding, had the calm of a man who had made a decision he was completely settled about, which Nathan noticed and found genuinely moving, though he didn't say so. He had his own things he was working out. The conversation he and Sophia had started the night before, or that had started really on the first afternoon when she'd said, "I'm not here to make your weekend difficult," and he'd said 4 days and they'd both known it was more than that. That conversation needed a coda. Not a resolution in the sense of every variable accounted for and every question answered, because neither of them was the kind of person who believed that was how real things worked. But a coda. A sense of where they actually stood. He caught her alone in the early afternoon, on the side porch, where the sun was landing at an angle that made it genuinely warm despite the temperature. She was on her laptop. The Monday call was still coming. The director's situation still required her attention. But she closed it when he came out and moved to make space on the bench. "How's the Monday situation looking?" he asked. "Better than it was 2 days ago." She pulled her knees up slightly. "I've got the argument structure where I want it. I know his plays. I've addressed them preemptively enough that he either needs to be honest about what he's actually trying to do or he needs to back down." She paused. "He'll probably back down. He doesn't have enough board support, and I think he knows it. And if he doesn't, then we have a real conversation about whether he's still the right fit for the role." She said it without relish, the way she made hard calls, clearly without drama, having already done the private work of weighing it. "It is what it is." Nathan looked at the mountain. The afternoon sun was turning the snow surface into something almost blinding, every crystal contributing its fraction of light. I want to say something practical, he said. She looked at him, not instead of what we said last night, in addition to it. He turned toward her. I've been thinking about what this actually looks like. When we're back in the city and it's not a mountain and a fireplace and unusual circumstances that made honesty feel more possible than it normally does. I've been thinking about the same thing, she said. And I think, she said carefully, that we already know how to be in each other's lives. We did it for 6 years. We know each other's rhythms. We know each other's difficult parts. We know what we need from a conversation and what we don't. She met his eyes. The question isn't whether we can navigate it. The question is whether we're willing to name what it actually is, out loud, to each other, consistently. I've never been good at that part, he said. The naming. I know. I'm aware that I've been not withholding exactly, more like I wait until I'm certain, and by the time I'm certain, I've been sitting on something for too long, and the moment has shifted. I know that too. She tilted her head. Nathan, I am not a low-maintenance situation. I run a company with 700 employees, including the international offices. I make decisions that affect those people's lives constantly, and I bring that home with me because it doesn't switch off. I will work too much. I will go quiet when I'm processing something hard, and I'll need you to not take that personally, which is an unreasonable thing to ask, but I'm asking it anyway. She kept her gaze level. I am telling you the real version so that you're not making a decision based on something easier than what's actually true. Sophia. He let the name sit for a second. I know all of that. I've known all of that for 6 years. I know you know, but knowing about someone's life and choosing to be in it are different things. Yes, he said. They are. He kept looking at her. I'm choosing. The mountain was very bright. She held his gaze with the specific steadiness she had when she'd committed to something and wasn't moving from it. I'm choosing too, she said. They sat with that. Not romantically, not cinematically. They were 2 tired adults on a porch bench in December, both of them carrying the ordinary weight of complex lives, and they were choosing anyway. That was what it was. Nothing about it was easy or clean, and it didn't need to be. I want to do this right, Nathan said. Not fast, right. Define right. Actually talk to each other. Use the phone for its intended purpose. He said it dryly, and she heard the dryness, and something in her face shifted into the real smile, the unguarded one. Introduce it properly to Lily, when we know what it is well enough to explain it. Not spring anything on her. She's 7, and she's perceptive, and she deserves to be brought in honestly. Agreed, completely. And, he paused, I want to hear about your work, not just the highlights, the Monday calls, the director problems, the decisions that keep you up. I want to be the person you actually tell about it, not the managed version. She looked at him. Something moved through her expression that she let move through it without catching and containing it. Okay, she said. I want the same from you. I want to know about the projects, the ones that excite you and the ones that are driving you crazy. I want to know about Lily's school situations and what she's reading and what she's worried about. A pause. I want the 6 o'clock calls back. The 6 o'clock calls come standard, he said, even when they're inconvenient. Especially then. She nodded. He nodded. It was not a formal agreement, and it was not a declaration, and it was not a movie moment with swelling sound beneath it. It was 2 people sitting on a porch in the sun saying true things to each other and meaning them, which is rarer than it sounds and worth more than it looks. Nathan's mother appeared in the doorway behind them. She took one look at the bench and the quality of the air between the 2 people sitting on it and said, entirely unnecessarily, "Lunch is ready whenever." "Thanks, Mom," Nathan said. She went back inside with a quietness that for her amounted to a profound act of restraint. Sophia looked at the closed door, then at Nathan. She's been waiting for this for a while, hasn't she? Since approximately the 2nd year she knew you existed. She always sent me Christmas cards. I know, she made me address the envelope. Sophia looked at him. She made you? She said it was my responsibility to maintain my own social connections. He raised his eyebrows. She also included a handwritten note for the first 3 years that she sealed separately. I know. I always wondered if you knew about the note. I knew about the note. And you never asked what it said. I decided I didn't want to know what it said. He stood up and held a hand down to her, which she looked at for a second before taking it and standing. He didn't let go immediately. What did it say? She looked at him. The sun was in her eyes and she squinted against it slightly. The first year it said she could see what you couldn't see yet. She paused. The third year it said she hoped I wouldn't wait too long. He absorbed that. His mother, writing notes in secret to the woman he was too careful about his own feelings to be honest with. His mother, who knew things about him that he told himself no one could see. She's going to be insufferable about this, he said. Completely, Sophia agreed. I'm going to need you to be a buffer. I'm absolutely not going to be a buffer. He laughed, a real one, full and unguarded, and it had been so long since he'd heard himself do that without effort that it almost surprised him. She laughed too, the left-of-center one, and they were still standing there when Lily appeared in the doorway and looked at them with the eyes of someone cataloging information. Lunch, she said. Coming, Nathan said. You're holding hands, Lily said. Nathan looked down. He was, in fact, still holding Sophia's hand, which had not required any conscious decision to continue doing, and had apparently not required one to start either. We are. Lily assessed this data point with the thoroughness she brought to things that she'd suspected and was now confirming. Okay, she said, with the specific nonchalance of a child who has been right about something and is choosing to be gracious about it. Soup's getting cold. She went back inside. Nathan looked at Sophia. She looked at him. He didn't let go of her hand and they went inside. His mother, at the kitchen counter, did not say a single word. She did, however, have a quality to her silence that communicated everything she had chosen not to say, and Nathan accepted it because she had earned it, 3 years of Christmas card notes worth. The afternoon before a wedding has its own texture, particular and irreproducible. Claire moved through it with the contained energy of someone who had planned everything that could be planned, and was now in the hours when you simply have to trust the planning and let the thing happen. She looked beautiful, in the way people look beautiful when they are doing something they have completely committed to. Marcus stayed close to her without being in her way, which was its own skill, and which spoke well of him. Nathan helped Marcus with his boutonniere situation around 4 o'clock, because Marcus had discovered that the instructions provided by the florist were, as he put it, written by someone who has never held a boutonniere in their life. Nathan got it sorted in about 3 minutes, which was the kind of problem his hands were good at, and Marcus looked at the finished result on his lapel and then looked at Nathan with genuine gratitude. She's a good person, Marcus said, quietly enough that it was just between them. He meant Sophia. He'd been watching the same things Nathan's mother had been watching, apparently, with similar conclusions. I've known her almost as long as I've known Claire. She doesn't let many people in. No, Nathan agreed. She doesn't. You're one of them. Marcus adjusted his lapel. Have been for a while. Nathan didn't say anything, because Marcus wasn't saying it to get a response. He was saying it because it was true, and he thought it worth saying. Good luck tomorrow, Nathan said. Don't need luck. Marcus grinned. Not smugly, just with the ease of someone who meant it. Claire did the hard part. I just have to show up. That's usually the hardest part, Nathan said. Marcus considered that. Yeah, he said. Fair. Dinner that night was the actual rehearsal dinner at the venue in town, a 20-minute drive down the mountain road that the county plows had done that afternoon, all of them in 2 cars through the early December dark. The venue was a restored farmhouse with the lights on warm and the tables set and a private dining room for the family, and it had the quality of a place that had been used for important moments long enough to understand them. Claire cried once when her mother gave a toast that was only 7 sentences long and required no elaboration whatsoever. Marcus held her hand and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. Nathan's mother gave a toast that was longer and also required no elaboration, and his mother, as his mother always did, found the line between sentiment and specificity that made the thing true rather than performative. Sophia was seated across from Nathan at the dinner table, which had not been engineered this time. It was just how the seating worked out. And they talked across it in the natural rhythm they'd always had, the way their conversation had always been able to pick up mid-thought because they'd known each other long enough that some of the preamble was already shared. Derek noticed it and said nothing. Patricia's husband noticed it and smiled into his wineglass. Lily, seated between Nathan's mother and Bea, ate her dinner and participated in the toasts with a glass of sparkling water held like a champagne flute, with the seriousness of someone taking a ceremonial role. When Claire and Marcus kissed at the end of the dinner to a round of applause, Lily applauded with sincere enthusiasm and then turned to Bea and said something that made Bea laugh so hard she had to put her glass down. On the drive back up the mountain, Nathan had Lily in the front seat, and she fell asleep against the window before they were 5 minutes out, which was what long emotional days did to 7-year-olds. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the dark mountain road in the headlights, and his daughter asleep beside him, and Sophia was in the car behind them with Claire and Marcus, and he thought about what Marcus had said. "I just have to show up." He thought it was possibly the most important sentence he'd heard all weekend. He had spent a very long time being careful about showing up, being selective about it, protecting himself from the specific vulnerability of being somewhere fully, because being somewhere fully meant it could cost you something if it went wrong. He had a daughter and a mortgage and a career and a 7-year-old school schedule and a whole architecture of a life that he'd built carefully on his own, and being careful about it had felt like responsibility. He was not sure anymore that it had always been responsibility. Some of it, he thought now, driving up the mountain in the dark, had been fear wearing responsibility's clothes. He carried Lily inside and put her to bed without waking her, and she barely stirred, already deep in the sleep of children who have had a full day and used all of it. Sophia found him in the kitchen when he came back down. She was standing at the counter with a glass of water, not doing anything with it, just standing there in the dark kitchen in her dress from dinner, the rust-colored top, and the coat she'd thrown on for the drive. She looked at him when he came in. "She's down?" she said. "Out cold." He pulled a glass from the cabinet and filled it from the tap and drank it standing at the counter beside her. They were quiet for a moment. The rest of the house was doing its settling into nighttime sounds. "Tomorrow's going to be a good day," he said. "Yeah," Sophia said. "It will." Claire's going to cry 3 times. At least 4. The dress moment, the vows, when Marcus's dad hugs her, and one unpredictable one that nobody will see coming. That's specific. I know Claire. He put his glass in the sink. She put hers in the sink. The kitchen was dark except for the small light above the stove that someone always left on in houses like this, a permanent small warmth. "After tomorrow," he said. "When we're back in the city." She looked at him. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. Not the first coffee, or the checking in, or the careful re-entry into each other's lives. He looked at her steadily. "Dinner. Like a real thing, because it is a real thing. And I want to do it before I talk myself into some slower approach that's actually just fear with better manners." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Nathan, I've been in love with you for 3 years. My timeline for dinner is whenever you're free." "Next Friday," he said. "Next Friday," she said. He stepped forward and kissed her, because the distance had been unreasonable for long enough, and because showing up all the way meant this too. It was not a perfect first kiss by any cinematic measure. She exhaled sharply against it like it was something she'd been holding back and had finally let out. And he had to recalibrate the angle because they were the same height, and that required a small adjustment. And it lasted exactly long enough to be real, before they both pulled back and stood in the kitchen with the small light above the stove and the mountain outside and the whole ordinary miraculous weight of finally. "Okay," she said. Her voice was slightly lower than usual. "Okay," he said. She squeezed his hand once and went down the hall. He stood in the kitchen for a moment and then he turned off the stove light and went to bed. He slept immediately. Full and complete, no ceiling staring, no circling. Just down, the way you go when you've stopped carrying something you were carrying so long you forgot it wasn't supposed to be permanent. Claire's wedding day arrived cold and clear and perfectly itself. The ceremony was at 10, as planned, in the farmhouse venue with its windows full of December light and the family filling the small rows of chairs, and Marcus standing at the front looking like a man who had decided exactly where he wanted to be and was there. Claire came down the aisle on their father's arm. Their father had driven up that morning from the city, just for the day, the divorce 20 years old and long resolved into something functional. And she was in the dress, and she was crying already, which Sophia clocked from 2 rows back and leaned slightly toward Nathan and said, one, without sound, just the shape of the word. He pressed his mouth together and looked forward. The vows were not elaborate. They were specific and honest and occasionally imperfect in the delivery, Marcus stumbling once on a word and Claire laughing through her tears when he did, and that moment was worth more than any polished version would have been. Nathan sat in the 3rd row with Lily on his right and Sophia on his left and his mother beside Sophia, and he watched his sister get married with the feeling of someone who has recently been reminded that real things actually happen in real time to real people, and you don't have to earn the right to be moved by them. Lily cried at the kiss, which surprised Nathan entirely because he had not known she was the crying type. She produced a single tear and looked mortified by it and wiped it away quickly and then looked at Nathan with an expression that said this never happened, and he looked straight ahead and honored the request. The reception was in the same farmhouse. The dining room opened up with tables and music from a 3-piece band that played standards and a few requests and got the room moving by 2 o'clock. Nathan danced with Lily, who required it, and then with his mother, who also required it, and then stood at the edge of the room with a drink and watched the afternoon happen around him. Sophia danced with Claire, who pulled her in when a song she apparently had history with came on and refused to hear any argument. They danced the way old friends dance, close and laughing, Sophia with her head back and the left of center laugh, Claire leaning into her and saying something in her ear that made Sophia's expression go briefly unguarded and warm. He watched her and didn't try to do anything with the watching. Just let it be a thing he was doing. Watching someone he loved at his sister's wedding in December, on the day things became what they'd been building toward for years, whether either of them had been willing to name it or not. Lily appeared beside him with a piece of wedding cake on a small plate. "Sophia dances well," she observed. "She does," Nathan said. "Better than you." "Thank you, Lily." "I'm just being honest." She ate a forkful of cake. "You dance like you're solving a problem." He looked at his daughter. "That's an extremely specific criticism." "B said it," she said. "I'm just repeating it." He looked at B across the room, who was 7 years old and had apparently developed opinions about his dancing that she was sharing with his daughter. "I'll work on it," he said. "Sophia could probably help," Lily said. And then she took her cake and went to find B, because she was 7, and she'd said the thing she came over to say, and she was done. The afternoon light shifted. The toasts were given. Best man, maid of honor, Nathan for the family, because Claire asked him, and he'd spent the previous morning on the back porch working out what he actually wanted to say rather than what sounded appropriate. He kept it short. He said Claire had always known exactly where she wanted to be and had never apologized for pursuing it, and that the best thing anyone could do when they found the right person was to stop finding reasons to complicate it and just say yes. He said Marcus looked like a man who understood that, and he thought they'd be fine. Claire looked at him from the head table with an expression that was partly the specific affection of a sister and partly the particular satisfaction of someone who had engineered an outcome and was watching it deliver. And he pointed at her briefly from behind the microphone, a gesture that meant, "I know what you did," and she raised her champagne glass, which meant, "I know you know, and I'm not sorry." Their mother, beside Sophia at the table, laughed so hard at this exchange that she had to set down her own glass. The reception wound down the way they do, not all at once, but by degrees, the energy shifting from dancing to conversation to the particular warmth of people who have been together all day and are getting tired in a comfortable way. Lily was flagging by 4 o'clock, but fighting it with the stubbornness she brought to anything she didn't want to concede. Nathan found her on a chair in the corner having an extremely drowsy conversation with B, and he crouched down and told her it was almost time to go. "Not yet," she said. "Bug." "I'm not tired." "You're asleep with your eyes open." She considered arguing this and apparently concluded she didn't have the resources. "5 more minutes," she said. 5 minutes, he agreed, which they both knew meant 10. And they both knew it, and that was fine. Sophia found him waiting for Lily's 5 minutes to expire, standing near the exit with their coats over his arm. She'd gotten her own coat and her bag, and she looked at him with the look of someone who was in the right place. "Good day," she said. "Really good day," he agreed. "Claire's going to be happy," Sophia said, not as a hope, as an assessment. "Yeah," Nathan said. "I think so." He looked at Marcus across the room, holding his new wife's hand and talking to Marcus's father, and there was nothing in his posture that suggested anything other than complete settledness. "I think Marcus already is." Sophia looked at the room. All of it. The flowers coming down from the tables, the band packing up, the last conversations, the particular gold of late afternoon light through the farmhouse windows. She looked at it the way you look at a thing you want to remember. "Nathan," she said. He looked at her. "I've been the person who builds things and moves forward and doesn't look back." She held his eyes. "I'm not saying that was wrong, but I spent 7 months looking back, whether I admitted it or not. Looking back at the specific shape of what I didn't have anymore." She stopped. "I don't want to look back anymore. I want to look at what's actually here." He heard everything in that. The years of it. The airport in October. The 6 o'clock windows. The Christmas card notes she'd kept. The way she'd asked him, in this same building 2 hours ago, to dance with her, not dramatically but simply. Just turned and held out her hand and he'd taken it, and they'd been terrible at it together, and it hadn't mattered at all. "I'm here," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm just acknowledging it, out loud." She almost smiled. "I'm working on that." "You're doing fine." Lily materialized at his elbow, coat already on, somehow, which she must have retrieved herself, and her small bag over her shoulder. She looked up at both of them with the clear brown eyes that missed nothing. "Ready," she said. They drove back to Cedar Ridge one last time to collect the rest of their bags, and the cabin was quiet in the late afternoon, the other guests already mostly departed or departing. Nathan moved through the room he'd shared with Sophia and stripped the beds the way you do when you're leaving someone else's house, left the towels folded, made sure Lily hadn't left anything under the bed or behind the chair, which she had, her backup gloves, the spare pair, the one she'd given him for the snow fort. He held them for a moment. Then he put them in her bag, in the outside pocket where she'd find them. Sophia was done before him, her bag by the door, standing at the window looking at the back field. The snow fort was still there, or most of it. The repaired section holding, the snow table intact, 2 small pine cones still on its surface, unclaimed things left behind by the storm. "It held," she said when she heard him behind her. "We reinforced it well." Lily did most of the work. Don't tell her that. She already knows. She turned from the window. The room looked like a room that people had lived in briefly and left carefully. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "For what specifically?" "For not making this easy when it needed to be hard." She picked up her bag. "For being angry when you had reason to be. For being honest when it would have been simpler not to." She met his eyes. "For showing up." He picked up his own bag. "Thank you for not getting on the plane." She held his gaze for a moment. "Best decision I ever made," she said. No hesitation, completely settled. They turned off the lamp and closed the door and went down the hall and out to the cars, where Lily was waiting in the cold with the specific impatience of a child who has said she is ready and means it. The drive down the mountain was the road he'd driven up 3 days ago. The same switchbacks and pines, the same gravel shoulders, and the same drop of mountain view to the left. It looked different now, and he didn't try to explain why. It just did. Lily was awake for the first hour and talked about the wedding with the analytical thoroughness she applied to anything that had generated a lot of emotional data. Who cried, who danced, what the cake tasted like, whether Marcus's boutonniere had held up, which she had apparently been monitoring throughout the day. "The ceremony was good," she concluded finally. "The part about the vows was the best part. They said real things." "Yeah," Nathan said. "They did. People don't always say real things." "No," he said. "They don't." She looked out the window. The dark pine trees went past, the headlights catching the road ahead in 2 steady beams. "It's better when they do," she said. She was asleep 20 minutes later, her head against the window, the same posture as the night before. He drove through the dark and thought about the specific truth of what she'd said, the way children sometimes put things that adults have been working around for years. It's better when they do. He thought about 7 months of silence that had felt like a statement and turned out to be a misunderstanding. He thought about the parking garage and the blocked number and the airport in October and the Adirondack chair on the porch when he'd had 3 seconds before she saw him and used them poorly. He thought about the snow fort and the bridge he'd drawn in his notebook and the fire burning low in the night and the kitchen with the small light above the stove. He thought about all the real things that had finally been said in 5 days on a mountain in December by 2 people who had been talking around them for years, and how much lighter the car felt carrying them home. His phone lit up on the passenger seat. A text, the screen showing the name before he could look away from the road. Sophia. Friday. I'm buying. He smiled at the road ahead. Didn't touch the phone. Drove. A mile later, at a red light at the bottom of the mountain where the county road met the state highway, he picked it up and typed one word. Deal. He put the phone face down and drove his daughter home through the December dark, and the road was clear, and the stars were where they always were. And he didn't feel the need to look back at any of it. He was already looking forward. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. The misunderstanding that nearly destroyed them became the thing they'd always come back to. Not as a wound, but as the moment they stopped pretending they didn't know what they were to each other. And in a life full of things that don't last, the single father who thought he'd lost his best friend discovered the most durable truth he knew, that the people worth having are worth the mess of actually having them. Nothing about it was perfect. It was better than that. It was real.